My sister announced her engagement at my graduation party, so I let karma deliver a surprise she couldn't escape. My sister Courtney has had a gift for making any room orbit around her for as long as I can remember. Not in a charming way either. More like if attention was oxygen, she'd start kicking when somebody else got too much of it. Courtney is 29, I'm 24. We grew up outside Columbus in a very regular, very loud family where every birthday involved a crockpot somewhere and at least one aunt yelling over a football game. My dad, Mark, is the kind of man who thinks every conflict can be solved by pretending it isn't happening. My mom, Linda, believes keeping the peace is the highest form of morality, which in practice usually meant everybody else adjusting themselves around Courtney so Courtney never had to hear the word no. When we were kids, it was smaller stuff. If I had a piano recital, Courtney would suddenly have a stomachache so dramatic my mom would miss half my performance standing in the lobby rubbing her back. If I got a birthday sleepover, Courtney would feel left out and end up hovering in the doorway all night, then crying because we weren't including her. On my 15th birthday, my parents let me pick the restaurant, and Courtney spent dinner announcing she thought her boyfriend was cheating. So the entire meal became about comforting her while my cake sat melting next to the check presenter. Everybody always had a reason ready. Courtney is sensitive. Courtney just feels things deeply. Courtney's going through a lot. Courtney doesn't mean it like that. By the time I was in high school, I stopped expecting to have moments that were fully mine. When I got accepted into Ohio State's nursing program after busting my ass for it, Courtney showed up halfway through dinner with a fresh spray tan and announced she was thinking about launching a skincare brand, and somehow we spent an hour discussing packaging ideas for something that never existed. When I turned 21, she brought a guy she'd been dating for maybe 3 weeks and spent the whole night making out with him in the backyard until my cousin Becca finally muttered, "I didn't realize this was Courtney's saliva showcase." That was the first time I laughed about it instead of crying. It's not like Courtney had some tragic life. She was just used to the world rearranging itself around her moods. She was pretty in a very obvious way, blonde and polished and photogenic without trying too hard. She'd walk into a gas station in leggings and a messy bun and still somehow look like she'd been styled for an ad. People responded to that. My parents definitely did. The thing is, I don't even think Courtney always consciously planned to take over every situation. Sometimes I think it was just instinct, like reaching for the biggest blanket in the room before anybody else could get warm. I'm not like that. I've always been the one who made schedules and color-coded binders and backup plans. I worked through school, first at a coffee shop and then as a server at a sports bar near campus because tips were better and nursing school is somehow both a full-time program and a full-time stress disorder. I'd do 12-hour clinical shifts, come home smelling like antiseptic and fryer oil, and fall asleep with drug cards stuck to my cheek. There were weeks I felt like I only existed in scrubs, non-slip shoes, and panic. But I finished. That mattered more than I can explain. I was the first person in our immediate family to get a 4-year degree without dropping out or bouncing around. My parents were proud in that vague, emotional, Facebook comment section way, but I don't think they fully understood what it cost me. My grandma June did, though. She used to call me on Sunday nights and ask if I'd eaten anything green that week. My aunt Denise did too. So did my boyfriend Adam, who had seen me cry in grocery store parking lots over dosage calculations and then get up the next morning and do it again. When graduation got close, my mom insisted on throwing a party. Not just cake after the ceremony, but a real backyard graduation party at my parents' house. She ordered navy and silver decorations because those were my school colors. She rented round tables and white chairs. Dad cleaned out the garage. My uncle Rob promised to smoke brisket. My aunt was making baked mac and cheese in those huge foil pans that can feed a church basement. I said yes because I wanted, for once, to let people celebrate me without apologizing for it. And because my mom looked me in the face in our kitchen one Tuesday night and said, "This is your day. I know we haven't always gotten things right with Courtney, but this one is about you." I remember that sentence exactly because it turned out to be such complete nonsense. A week before the party, Courtney started acting weird. Not mean weird, secretive weird. She called me asking what time people were arriving. Then she asked if I knew whether Grandma June was definitely coming. Then whether Aunt Denise was bringing her good camera. Then whether Adam's parents would be there too. Then whether I thought Dad still had champagne flutes from New Year's. That last one made me pause. I said, "Why?" She laughed in that airy, fake casual way she has when she's already hiding something. "God, nothing. I just thought maybe Mom wanted them out." I asked if she and her boyfriend Eric were still coming, and she said yes, but in this bright, clipped voice like she was texting while talking. Eric and Courtney had been together a little over a year. He was 34, worked in commercial roofing sales, had an 8-year-old daughter named Ava from his first marriage, and generally seemed decent. Not thrilling, not hilarious, not the kind of guy you'd write poetry about, but steady. Which honestly made him the first decent fit she'd had. He listened more than he talked. He looked a little tired all the time. He adored Ava. He was polite to my parents. He also, and this will matter later, took family stuff really seriously. The only issue was that Courtney acted like his life before her was a personal inconvenience. If Ava had a recital on the same weekend Courtney wanted to go to Nashville, suddenly Courtney was just feeling really pushed aside. If Eric had to coordinate with his ex-wife Megan, Courtney would go cold for 2 days and act like he was betraying her by peacefully co-parenting. I never thought he should marry her. But I also never thought he'd be dumb enough to let her steamroll him into something at my graduation party. The day of graduation was hot in that sticky Ohio way where you step outside and your skin immediately feels handled. My ceremony was at 2. The party started at 5 at my parents' place about 20 minutes away. The ceremony itself was great. Long and boring and full of names mispronounced by a woman who sounded like she hated every graduate equally, but still great. I wore the cap, took the pictures, hugged Adam so hard his boutonniere stabbed me in the collarbone. My mom cried before we even sat down. Dad kept saying, "There she is, Nurse Leah," even though I had not passed boards yet and was technically not a nurse in the legal sense, but I let it go because he looked so proud. Courtney was at the ceremony too, sitting with my parents. She looked unbelievable, which should have been my second clue. Full blowout, perfect makeup, pale pink dress that definitely cost more than she said it did, little strappy heels no sane person wears to an afternoon graduation unless they plan on being photographed a lot. Eric sat next to her in a navy button-down with sleeves rolled up, and Ava had a yellow sundress and 2 braids. Courtney waved at me afterward and squealed and hugged me and told me I looked so smart, which is exactly the kind of compliment she gives when she wants credit for being supportive without actually saying anything meaningful. I asked her quietly, while we were all standing around by the stadium steps taking pictures, "Everything good?" She smiled so hard it looked painful. Perfect. At my parents' house, the backyard looked honestly beautiful. Mom had gone overboard in a way I suddenly found kind of sweet. There were little blue mason jars on the tables with baby's breath in them. My graduation pictures were clipped onto strings with tiny clothespins. Dad had hung lights across the fence even though it wouldn't get dark until later. Somebody had put my cap and stole on a display table with framed photos from kindergarten up through college, which was cheesy and exactly the kind of thing I secretly love. There was a sheet cake with "Congratulations Leah" in blue frosting, plus a smaller tray of brownies because my family doesn't trust events with only one dessert. My Uncle Rob was by the smoker fanning himself with a paper plate. Aunt Denise already had a cup of sangria in her hand and lipstick on her teeth. Grandma June was in one of those floral blouses old ladies wear when they're about to say something devastating in a soft voice. For about an hour, it was perfect. People hugged me, gave me cards, asked where I was applying, told embarrassing stories from when I was little. My former high school biology teacher came. Adam's parents came. My cousin Becca brought her new baby and let me hold him while my cap pinched the back of my head. I took pictures with my friends from nursing school. We laughed about instructors we were all afraid of and patients who had changed us. And for once, Courtney was not the center of it. She and Eric showed up around 6, later than most people, with Ava and Eric's parents, Carol and Mike. That was the third clue. I hadn't realized his parents were coming. They were nice enough people, but not close enough to my family that they'd naturally be on a graduation guest list. Courtney breezed in carrying a bakery box and one of those giant gift bags with tissue paper arranged like it was auditioning for a pageant. Eric looked uneasy the second he got out of the car. Not guilty, not smug, just uneasy. Courtney kissed my cheek and handed me the bag. "Sorry we're late. Ava took forever with her hair." Ava, who was 8 and visibly did not do her own hair, looked up at her dad and then at me. I laughed it off and thanked her. Eric gave me a hug and said, "Congratulations, Leah. Seriously, this is huge." He meant it. I remember that now because at the time I was too distracted by Courtney scanning the yard like she was checking sightlines. The bakery box turned out to be macarons in my school colors. Nice gesture, actually. Weirdly thoughtful for Courtney, which should have made me even more suspicious. Around 7, when most people had eaten and were drifting into that lazy, happy post-dinner phase, my dad stood up by the patio with a beer bottle and tapped it with a fork for attention. This had been planned. He wanted to give a little toast before cake. My mom stood next to him looking shiny and emotional. I was by the dessert table with Adam's arm around my waist. Grandma June was in her folding chair. Aunt Denise was already lifting her phone to record. Dad started talking about how he still remembered teaching me to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac and how I was the kid who lined up stuffed animals and pretended to take their temperatures. Standard dad stuff. A little rambling, a little repetitive, but sweet. My mom dabbed at her eyes. People were smiling. Then, right when he got to, "And today we're here to celebrate Leah and how hard she's worked." Courtney clinked a spoon against her glass. Actually clinked a spoon against a glass like we were at a wedding. She stood up next to Eric, beaming, left hand already lifted. "Oh my God," she said. "I know this is Leah's day, but Eric and I have some news too." There are moments when your body understands something before your brain does. My stomach just dropped, straight down. It was like missing a step in the dark. She stuck her hand out and wiggled her fingers, and there it was. A ring, oval diamond, thin gold band, big enough that you could practically hear it. My mom screamed, not gasped, screamed. Hands flew to mouths. Aunt Denise said, "Are you kidding me?" But not in a happy tone. Carol, Eric's mother, started clapping like this was expected. Dad, in one of the most useless reactions I've ever seen, just blinked and said, "Well. Wow." Courtney laughed and leaned into Eric. "He proposed this morning." Then she said the line that still makes my eye twitch when I think about it. "We just figured everybody's here already." Everybody's here already. Like my graduation party was a Costco sample tray she'd wandered up to and decided to make use of. People swarmed her immediately. My mom reached her first, crying and hugging her and grabbing her hand to look at the ring. Eric smiled, but it was tight. Polite, not joyful. Ava hung back near the patio door looking confused. Carol started telling people details nobody had asked for. My dad drifted toward them because conflict, in his mind, is best managed by physically migrating toward the loudest person. Within maybe 30 seconds, the center of the party shifted. Just like that, my cake, with my name on it, sat untouched 3 feet away while people crowded around my sister asking when the wedding would be and whether she'd known all along and let us see the ring and oh my God, congratulations. I wish I could say I handled it gracefully. I didn't throw a fit or cry publicly, but I just froze. My face got hot. My chest got tight. I remember hearing somebody say, 2 celebrations in one, and wanting to smash a plate. Adam leaned down and quietly said, "Did you know?" I said, "No." He asked, "Do you want me to say something?" And I almost said yes. I almost told him to tell everyone to shut up and get away from her. I almost walked straight over, grabbed the spoon out of Courtney's hand, and asked her what exactly was wrong with her. But I looked at my mom draped all over Courtney, looked at Dad already doing his useless smiling, and I knew exactly how it would go. It would become Leah caused a scene at her own party. Leah embarrassed her sister. Leah overreacted. Leah couldn't just be happy. That is the curse of growing up with someone like Courtney. They train everybody around them to see your reaction as the problem. So I did the only thing that felt remotely dignified in the moment. I stepped back. I walked into the kitchen. I stood at the sink and stared out the little window over the backyard while my own graduation party turned into an engagement reception I never agreed to host. A minute later, Aunt Denise came in behind me. She did not bother lowering her voice. That selfish little witch. I laughed once, but it came out sounding like I'd swallowed glass. "She really did it," I said. Denise looked at me for a second, and her face changed. Anger, but also something softer. "Honey, did you know she was planning that?" "No. Did your mother?" "I don't think so." Denise muttered something about Linda needing a spine transplant. Then Grandma June came in too, slower, steadier, closing the screen door behind her. Leah, I turned around and immediately felt tears hit. I hadn't even realized they were there. Grandma handed me a napkin from the counter. Do you want me to put a stop to this? That's the part I've gone over in my head 100 times, because I think it was the exact fork in the road where the rest of the night got decided. I could have said yes. I could have let my aunt march outside and publicly shame Courtney. I could have let Grandma, who is 5 feet tall and terrifying, reduce my sister to dust in front of 50 people. I could have called Eric out myself. Instead, I wiped my face and said, no. Let her have it. Denise stared at me. Leah, I shrugged, and it felt weirdly calm all of a sudden. Seriously, let her have it. What I meant was, I'm done protecting her from the consequences of being herself. Because here's the thing, Courtney never expected consequences. Not really. She expected irritation, maybe. Eye rolls, private venting, but not actual fallout. Somebody always rushed in with a towel and a story and a reason. I was tired, and for once, I didn't want to be the one smoothing the ground behind her. Adam came into the kitchen then, holding 2 cups of water. He took one look at my face and asked if I wanted to leave. I said no. This was still my party, even if it didn't feel like it anymore. He squeezed my shoulder and stood there with me while we listened to the muffled noise outside swell around Courtney. Then the screen door opened again, and Eric stepped in. Not Courtney, Eric. He looked pale, not angry yet, just unsettled. Hey, he said to me. Can I talk to you for a second? Aunt Denise, bless her, immediately said, I'm staying. Eric gave a quick nod like he didn't have the energy to argue. He looked at me and rubbed the back of his neck. Courtney told me she ran the announcement by you, he said. She said your parents thought it would be fun since everybody was here and you didn't care. The whole kitchen went silent. Denise let out this sharp, disgusted little laugh. Grandma June didn't even blink. I felt something inside me go still. Because until then, I had assumed Eric was in on it. I thought he was just as tacky as she was. But the way he said it, he sounded embarrassed. Like a man realizing he'd walked into church wearing a clown suit because somebody told him it was themed. I never said that, I told him. He looked like he'd been slapped. You didn't? No, I had no idea. Denise crossed her arms. Of course she had no idea. This is her graduation party. Eric stared at the floor for a second, jaw working. Then he said, very quietly, she told my parents your mom suggested we do it tonight. Grandma June said, Linda suggested no such thing. He nodded once. Slow, like pieces were clicking into place and none of them were good. I could see it happening in real time. The whole architecture of whatever Courtney had told him was collapsing. And I could also see the exact moment he realized his 8-year-old daughter was outside in the middle of the kind of family stunt he had specifically told Courtney he hated. His face hardened. I'm sorry, he said to me. Seriously. Then he turned and went back outside. Denise looked at me. Well, I said nothing. Grandma June took a sip of water from a plastic cup. There it is. We all stood at the window for a second like we were watching weather roll in. Outside, Courtney was still smiling and flashing her ring. My mom was calling across the yard for someone to bring out champagne. Carol was telling Becca how Eric had hidden the ring box in a golf bag, which maybe was true and maybe wasn't. Eric walked back over to Courtney, but he wasn't smiling anymore. He leaned down and said something in her ear. Her smile twitched. She laughed too brightly and touched his chest like she was trying to keep the performance moving. I went back outside because, again, it was still my party and I refused to disappear from it. Adam stayed close beside me. A few people gave me weird, sympathetic looks. A few others kept talking to Courtney like nothing had happened. My mom saw me and immediately said, Leah, isn't this exciting? In the exact tone people use when they know they've screwed you over but want your cooperation in pretending otherwise. I said, sure, and kept walking. That set the tone for the next 20 minutes. Courtney floated around the yard basking. My parents drifted after her. People asked to see the ring over and over. My graduation gifts sat stacked on a card table while the macarons she brought somehow ended up front and center next to my cake. Somebody actually asked if we were combining celebrations, and my mother said, well, I guess we are now, with this laugh that made me want to step into traffic. The only thing that kept me from losing it was the fact that a lot of people were not buying Courtney's act. Aunt Denise was openly cold to her. My cousin Becca congratulated her in the dead voice of a hostage video. Grandma June didn't go near her at all. And Eric was visibly furious. Not explosive, just quiet, tight, deeply not okay. He stood near Ava and his parents, speaking less and less. A couple times Courtney tried to tug him toward groups of people so he could retell the proposal story, and each time he did it, but shorter. Like he was fulfilling a contractual obligation he regretted. Then my mom insisted it was time for dessert. I almost told her to skip it. I didn't want everybody gathered again. I didn't want more speeches. I didn't want one more second of performative family joy. But Uncle Rob had already started cutting the cake, and my dad was once again tapping his bottle with a fork because apparently no lesson can be learned twice in one evening. This time, before anybody else could take over, Grandma June stood up. Now, my grandmother is 78, has smoked exactly 2 cigarettes in her life just to prove she didn't like them, and can silence a room by adjusting her glasses. She isn't loud, she doesn't need to be. She said, before cake is served, I'm going to finish the toast that Mark started. And everybody did, in fact. Shut up. Grandma walked over until she was standing beside me. She took my hand, which almost made me cry again right there. Leah, she said, looking at me and not the crowd, has worked harder than most people in this family have ever noticed. You could feel the air change. She worked double shifts, studied through the night, showed up for her clinicals, helped take care of her father after surgery, and got herself through one of the most demanding programs there is. I am proud of many things in this family. Tonight, I am especially proud of her. I heard Aunt Denise make a little satisfied hum somewhere behind me. Grandma kept going, and because this is her graduation party, she said, with just enough emphasis to turn the sentence into a knife, I would like to give her the gift I came here to give. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope and a key ring. I genuinely had no idea what was happening. She put the envelope in my hand first. Inside was a cashier's check for $10,000. I just stared at it. Then she held up the keys. And the Buick is yours now. I can't drive much anymore, and you need a reliable car more than I need one sitting in my garage. I started crying. No dignity, just full tears. The Buick wasn't fancy. It was a 6-year-old silver sedan that smelled faintly like peppermint and old lady lotion and had exactly 12 country CDs in the glove box. But it was paid off. Reliable, mine, and that check was enough to wipe out the private loan that had been choking me since sophomore year. People clapped, then a lot of people stood up. Then it became this whole thing, but this time around me. My friends were hugging me. Adam kissed the top of my head. Aunt Denise was crying now too, which she'd deny to this day. Even my dad looked stunned, like he just remembered I was the event being held in his backyard. Courtney's face changed in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. Not because she was happy for me. She wasn't. It was because for the first time that night, she understood attention had moved away from her and she couldn't charm it back on command. She tried, of course. She actually laughed and said, "Oh my God, Grandma, that's amazing. Leah, now you can drive to wedding planning with me. I'm not making that up." Nobody laughed. Eric looked at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. Then Carol, his mother, said the sentence that lit the rest of the night on fire. "I thought Linda wanted the engagement announced tonight," she said. She wasn't being mean, she was confused, but she said it out loud. Right there. My mom blinked. What? No. Courtney turned so fast her heels sank into the grass. Carol looked from my mom to Eric to Courtney. "I thought you said this was all arranged." Eric's jaw tightened. "That's what I was told too." My mother's face did that awful thing where defensiveness and embarrassment hit at the same time. I didn't know anything about it. Aunt Denise, who has never once seen a grenade and thought let me not pull the pin, said, Leah didn't know either. Courtney hijacked her party. The entire yard went dead quiet. Courtney gave Denise a look like she wanted to skin her alive. "That is not what happened." Denise said, "Really? Then when exactly did Leah agree to have her graduation toast interrupted so you could flash your ring?" Courtney laughed, but there was no humor in it now. "I wasn't flashing anything. We were sharing good news." At her graduation party, Grandma June said. Eric looked at Courtney. "You told me she was fine with it." Courtney's eyes darted. "She was. I was not," I said. "I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. Everybody heard me anyway." Courtney stared at me, and for a second I think she actually expected me to save her. That was the wildest part. After all of it, after she'd stepped on the one day I asked not to be stepped on, she still assumed I would step in and soften the blow because that's what I'd always done. I'd always been the easier daughter. The lower maintenance one. The one who swallowed things. Not that night. Eric took a step back from her. Did you lie to me? Courtney's voice went high and frantic. Eric, don't do this here. Did you lie to me? She opened her mouth, shut it, then said, I just knew if I waited, there would never be a perfect time. That's not an answer. Carol looked mortified. Mike stared into his cup like he wanted to evaporate. My mom tried to jump in. Okay, let's everybody calm down. But Eric was done calming down. You told me your sister was excited, he said. You told me your parents suggested it because all the family would be here. You told my daughter this was a family celebration. Ava, still standing by the patio door with a brownie on a napkin, looked like she wanted the ground to split open. Courtney lowered her voice and reached for Eric's arm. Can we talk inside? He pulled away. No, he said, because if I go inside, this becomes me helping you clean up another mess you made. That line landed so hard I felt it in my teeth. Courtney started crying instantly. Real tears or tactical tears, who knows? With her it was always a coin flip. So now you're humiliating me? He let out this short, unbelieving laugh. I'm humiliating you? Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to be the first person to acknowledge that a full implosion was happening between the burger tray and the sheet cake. Then Eric said the thing that ended it. If this is how you treat your own sister at her graduation party, and you can look me in the face and lie about it, I need to seriously rethink what I'm doing. Courtney's mouth dropped open. You are not seriously saying that right now. I am. She looked around the yard like somebody might jump in and rescue her. My mom looked panicked. My dad looked like he wanted to teleport. Carol looked ashamed. Denise looked spiritually fulfilled. I looked at the icing border on my cake because if I looked directly at Courtney I might have smiled, and that would have made me the villain forever. Courtney hissed, you can't dump me in front of everyone. Eric said, I'm not having this conversation here anymore. Ava, get your sweater. Ava immediately went to him, which I noticed. Kids tell the truth with their feet. Courtney started crying harder. So that's it? Over this? One misunderstanding? Eric didn't answer her. He looked at me instead. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time louder, in front of everybody. You didn't deserve any of this. Then he took Ava's hand and walked toward the side gate. His parents followed after an awkward beat, Carol stopping only long enough to murmur, Congratulations, sweetheart, to me in a broken little voice. Courtney stood there in the middle of the yard, ring glittering, mascara beginning to stripe under her eyes, while half the family stared and the other half pretended not to. That was the karma part, I guess. Not something I planned, not some elaborate revenge, just the simple fact that once the truth got enough air, it didn't need my help. Courtney ran into the house. My mom immediately went after her. Dad stood frozen for a second, then went too. There was this surreal pause where everyone else remained in the yard surrounded by paper plates and folding chairs and strings of lights while my sister had a breakdown somewhere near my parents' linen closet. Uncle Rob, because he is from a generation of men who process all human pain through food, cleared his throat and asked if anybody wanted more brisket. And that somehow broke the tension. People started moving again, quietly at first, then more normally. Somebody handed me another napkin. Denise said, well, cake? Like she was suggesting a weather adjustment? My friends circled back around me. Adam asked if I wanted to end the party. I looked around and realized I didn't. So I didn't. I cut the cake with my name on it. I opened cards. I took pictures with my friends and with Grandma next to her car keys in my hand. Aunt Denise made a point of getting shots of me laughing with my cousins, me hugging Adam, me next to the dessert table without Courtney anywhere in sight. If you looked at those photos later, it was still my graduation party. Inside the house, Courtney cried for a solid 45 minutes. I know because you could hear the rise and fall of it every time someone opened the back door. At some point my mom came back out with that pinched expression she gets when she wants everyone to collaborate in a lie. She's very upset, she told me quietly. I said, I'm sure she is. Mom looked at the keyring in my hand, then at the half-empty yard. I wish tonight hadn't gone this way. That made me laugh, and not in a nice way. You mean because she announced her engagement at my graduation party or because her fiancé found out she lied? Mom's lips tightened. Leah, no, seriously. Which part do you wish hadn't happened? She lowered her voice more. You could have been more gracious. I just stared at her. Sometimes your parents say something so absurd your body actually doesn't know how to respond at first. It's like your brain needs a second to accept that yes, that really came out of an adult woman's mouth. Gracious, I repeated. She's your sister. And I'm your daughter. Mom looked away first. She started to say something else, then didn't, and went back inside. That hurt more than Courtney, if I'm being honest. Courtney being selfish was expected. My mother still finding a way to make my reaction the problem after all of it felt like somebody finally confirming a suspicion I'd had my whole life and hated being right about. The party wound down around 10. My friends helped stack chairs and pack leftovers. Grandma June gave me one of those long hugs old people give where they pat you twice at the end like they're sealing the hug shut. Denise kissed my forehead and told me not to answer my phone if Courtney called drunk. Adam loaded gifts into the Buick and kept saying, "Your car. Your actual car," in this adorably delighted voice that made me feel 20 pounds lighter. Courtney never came back out while guests were still there. After the last car left, I went inside to collect the cake server and the gift bags I'd left in the dining room. The house smelled like frosting, smoked meat, and expensive face spray. Courtney was at the kitchen table with her makeup half off, clutching a wad of tissues. My mom sat beside her rubbing her back. Dad was leaning against the counter looking 10 years older. Nobody spoke at first. Then Courtney looked up at me with swollen eyes and said, "You're happy about this?" I almost laughed again because the narcissism of that sentence was so pure it could have been studied in a lab. "No," I said, "I'm sad you turned my graduation party into this." "You could have said something sooner," she snapped. "You let me stand out there looking stupid." There it was. My fault again. I should have known. I said, "You did that all by yourself." Mom jumped in immediately. "Leah, enough." "Enough?" I turned to her. She hijacked my party. Courtney slammed the tissues down. "I got engaged. Sorry, my life doesn't stop because you graduated." I looked at her for a long second. "Do you hear yourself?" Dad finally spoke, very quietly. "Court, you shouldn't have done it tonight." She whipped around to him. "So everybody's against me now?" "Great." "No," he said, tired more than angry. "But you lied." Her face crumpled again. "I didn't lie. I just knew nobody would understand." "That is lying," I said. She stood up so fast the chair legs screeched. "You've always hated me." That was so ridiculous I actually felt calmer. "I don't hate you," I told her. "I'm just done rearranging myself to make you comfortable." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then she said, "You're so jealous of me it's actually pathetic." And there it was too. The old reliable. Every time she ran out of arguments, she reached for jealousy. As if there was anything in the world I wanted about being a grown woman who still needed to steal her sister's milestones to feel important. I picked up my gift bags. "Good night," I said. Mom called after me, "Don't leave like this." I turned around at the doorway. How else do people usually leave their own ruined graduation parties? Nobody answered. I went home with Adam. We loaded my gifts into his SUV and the Buick, then drove the Buick to my apartment because I refused to spend one more second in my parents' house that night. I cried halfway there. Not dramatic sobbing, just exhaustion leaking out. Adam held my hand at red lights and let me talk in messy circles about things that had happened years ago and things that had happened that night and things I probably should have admitted to myself a long time ago. The next morning, the family group chat was a disaster. My cousin Becca had sent 2 graduation photos of me and Grandma with heart emojis. Aunt Denise sent a close-up of my cap. Then my mom, at 8:14 a.m., sent a long text saying everyone should please remember that families go through emotional moments, and we need to show compassion because Courtney was heartbroken and humiliated. Humiliated. No mention of me. Denise responded with, "Maybe next time she can get engaged at her own event." My mom private texted me right after that asking me to tell Denise to stop making things worse. Not asking if I was okay. Not asking if I needed help bringing the car title to the BMV. Asking me to manage the adult who had defended me because managing everyone else's feelings had apparently become my unpaid internship. I ignored it. Courtney texted me around noon. "I hope you're thrilled. Eric won't answer me." Then another one. He says he needs space because I manipulated the situation. Thanks for embarrassing me in front of his parents. I stared at my phone for a full minute before replying. You embarrassed yourself. She sent back 6 paragraphs in under 2 minutes. According to her, I was cold, smug, and impossible to celebrate alongside because I always need to be the hardworking victim. She said all she wanted was to share joy with the family and I made it ugly because I can't stand seeing her happy. She said Eric was overreacting because his ex-wife Megan already poisoned him against women having emotions. She said I should have just smiled and let the night be nice. That last part really got me. Because that was the whole problem, right there. I was supposed to smile and let things happen to me. That had been my assigned role since childhood. I didn't answer. Over the next week, I got more of the story from different people. Apparently Eric had proposed that morning, yes. That part was real. He'd done it during a picnic at Inniswood Metro Gardens with Ava there. Sweet, low-key, thoughtful. According to Carol, he had originally planned to keep it private for a few days and maybe do a small family dinner later that month. Courtney, however, immediately started pushing to announce it that night at my party because everyone important will already be together. Eric was hesitant. He asked if I'd mind. Courtney told him I wouldn't. Then she told him my parents thought it was a cute idea. Then she told his parents the same thing, which is why they came dressed like it was a semi-formal event and not a backyard cookout for a nursing graduate. She sold everybody this version where it was basically a joint family celebration blessed by all involved. And maybe, if she'd married a different kind of man, it would have worked. But Eric was the kind of man who can tolerate drama until it touches his kid or his integrity. Once he realized she had used Ava and his parents as props in a lie, he was out. 2 days later, he came by my apartment. Not inside, just knocked, stood awkwardly in the hall holding a little gift bag I'd forgotten they'd brought, and asked if I had a minute. He looked exhausted. I wanted to apologize in person, he said, and give you this because Ava picked it out for you. Inside the bag was a mug that said Nurse Fuel in big dumb letters and a Starbucks card. I almost cried again because of course the only sincere graduation gift from that whole side of the mess had been chosen by an 8-year-old. I told him he didn't need to apologize, but he said he did. Then he told me he and Courtney were taking time apart, which is adult language for this is probably over unless somebody has a personality transplant. He admitted there had been other issues. The party wasn't the first time she'd lied to smooth something over in the moment and then expected everyone else to absorb the consequences. It was just the first time she'd done it in front of his daughter. I can work through bad judgment, he said. I can't build a marriage on manipulation. I said I understood. He nodded and looked down the hall for a second. For what it's worth, I really am proud of you. After he left, I sat on my couch staring at the mug for like 10 minutes. Courtney moved back into my parents' house the following weekend. Not officially, at first. At first it was just for a few nights because I need space. Then a suitcase appeared in my old bedroom. Then her hair products colonized the upstairs bathroom. Then Dad mentioned she was looking at wedding blogs, just to stay positive, which was frankly deranged considering the man she was supposed to marry had stopped returning anything but logistical texts. My mother went full triage mode. She brought Courtney takeout, rubbed her shoulders, talked about miscommunications, like the whole thing had been a weather event. She also called me twice asking if I'd consider meeting Courtney for coffee, to clear the air. I said no both times. Aunt Denise told me Mom was desperate to restore normalcy before church friends started asking questions. Which tracked. The family split pretty cleanly after that. On one side, Mom, plus one aunt who always takes the loudest person's side because she confuses volume with truth, plus Courtney obviously. On the other side, basically everybody who had eyes. Grandma June did not mince words. She told my mom, in front of several people at Sunday dinner, if one daughter's joy always requires the other daughter's sacrifice, that isn't family harmony. That's favoritism with better branding. That one made my father choke on green beans. Courtney stopped speaking to Grandma for almost a month. She also posted exactly one engagement photo online. A close-up of her hand on Eric's chest with the caption, "Forever starts now." Comments flooded in. Then, when people naturally started asking wedding questions and where Eric was and whether they had a date, the post quietly disappeared 3 days later. I wish I could say I was above checking that. I absolutely was not. Around 3 weeks after the party, my mom invited me over for dinner under the pretense of discussing car insurance paperwork from Grandma's Buick. I knew it was a trap, but I went because I did still need the paperwork. Courtney was there, of course. She was in sweats, no makeup, hair in a bun, which for her was basically public morning attire. The ring was still on. She looked at me like I was a coworker she hated but needed for a project. Dinner was meatloaf. Nobody talked about anything real for the first 20 minutes. Dad asked about NCLEX prep. Mom asked if I wanted more mashed potatoes. Courtney scrolled on her phone and sighed every 90 seconds like a Victorian invalid. Finally, Mom set her fork down and said, "I would really like us to move forward." Nobody answered. She looked directly at me. "Your sisters." Courtney gave this tiny little sniff like she'd already been softened by the wisdom of that statement. I said, moving forward would require her admitting what she did. Courtney slammed her phone down. "Oh my God." I said I was sorry it upset you. I looked at her. "That's not the same thing." "What do you want me to say, Leah? That I'm a monster?" "No, just the truth." She folded her arms. "Fine. The truth is I got engaged on a day when the whole family was together and I thought it would be nice to share it." "Sorry that apparently your graduation is a sacred holiday." Dad muttered, "Courtney." She ignored him. "I'm not the villain because my life happened too." There was something almost impressive about it, honestly. The ability to bulldoze straight past accountability and still see yourself as persecuted. I said, "You lied to Eric. You lied to his parents. You lied to me by omission. Then when it blew up, you said I should have helped you." "That's what happened." She went red. "You've been waiting for me to fail." "No," I said. "I've just stopped catching you." That landed. Dad looked down at his plate. Mom actually flinched. Courtney's eyes filled, but this time I saw something different under it. Not remorse. Recognition. Just for a second. Like she finally understood that the old dynamic had shifted and I wasn't stepping back into my place. She stood up and walked out of the kitchen. Mom immediately sighed like I'd broken something fragile. I said, "You invited me here to be guilted, didn't you?" "No," she said, but weakly. "Yes, you did." She started crying then, which honestly might be genetic in our family because none of us know how to have a clean confrontation. She said she hated that her daughters weren't speaking. She said she'd spent her whole life trying to keep everyone together. She said Courtney was just more emotional, and I was always the strong one, which is such a common family script it should come printed on tea towels. I told her I was strong because I had to be. That shut her up. I took the insurance papers, hugged Dad, and left. A few days later, I passed my NCLEX. That should be the triumphant ending, right? Big life milestone, career starts, sister implodes, karma settles the score. But real life doesn't wrap like that. It just keeps moving and dragging the same people along with it. I started working on a med-surg floor in August. The hours were brutal. I loved it anyway. I bought a cheap coffee maker for the break room because ours kept dying. I learned which shoes didn't murder my back. I cried after my first patient death and then came back the next day because that's what the job asks of you. I drove Grandma's Buick to every shift for months and kept her CDs in the car because somehow, Blue Moon of Kentucky, became comforting at 6 in the morning. Courtney and Eric officially broke up in September. Not because of the party alone, from what I heard, but the party was the crack that showed him what the foundation was made of. There had been other lies, other manipulations, other situations where Courtney created a mess and expected him to carry it because she got overwhelmed by the consequences of her own choices. After the graduation party, he just couldn't unsee it, especially with Ava involved. My mother acted like this was a tragic mystery nobody could solve. Courtney acted like she'd been abandoned by the world. I mostly stayed out of it. That probably sounds cold, maybe it was. But I had spent years feeling like my role in the family was to understand Courtney better than Courtney understood anyone else. To anticipate her needs, absorb her mood swings, forgive her before she apologized, step aside so she wouldn't trip over me on her sprint toward attention. Once I stopped doing that, I had a shocking amount of energy for my actual life. Adam noticed it before I did. One night after work, sitting on my apartment floor eating takeout because we still hadn't bought a dining table, he said, "You know you laugh more now, right?" I asked what he meant. He said, "You used to brace yourself every time your phone lit up. Now you don't." And he was right. Even now, my family isn't magically fixed. My mom still tries to both sides things. Dad still retreats when tension shows up. Courtney still, as far as I can tell, thinks the main tragedy of that night was that other people reacted badly to her choices. We're cordial now in that brittle, holiday-safe way. We can be in the same room. We can discuss mashed potatoes and whether Aunt Denise's dog is getting fat. But something changed for me after that party, and it hasn't changed back. I stopped volunteering for the role they wrote for me. The craziest part is that I really didn't have to do anything dramatic. I didn't expose her with a slideshow. I didn't make a speech. I didn't dump wine on her dress or throw her ring in the yard or post cryptic statuses online. I just told the truth when I was asked and refused to lie on her behalf. That was enough. Courtney announced her engagement at my graduation party because she assumed, like always, that she could grab a special moment out of my hands and everyone would adjust around her. Maybe they would have, if Eric had been a different man, or if Ava hadn't been standing right there, or if Aunt Denise had been less allergic to hypocrisy, or if Grandma June hadn't chosen that exact night to remind the room what the event was supposed to be. But none of that happened. What happened was she pulled the spotlight onto herself in front of a crowd and then found out, in real time, that not everybody was willing to clap along once they saw how she'd done it. And I let it happen. Story 2. The last thing my father said to me before he slammed the front door was, "If you marry him, then from that day forward, you are no longer our daughter." My mother was standing behind him in the hallway crying into the edge of her dupatta, but she didn't stop him. She didn't say, "Ramesh, don't say that." She didn't say, "Anika, wait." She just stood there and let him do it, which somehow hurt more. I was 26. I had 1 week left before my courthouse wedding. I was still stupid enough to think if I went over alone and talked calmly and explained that I wasn't choosing a stranger over them, I was choosing my own life, maybe something would crack. Maybe my mother would soften. Maybe my father would do his usual thing where he barked first and came around later. Maybe my younger brother, Dev, would stop hovering in the dining room doorway with that smirk he got whenever he knew I was about to be made into the family lesson. None of that happened. My father pointed toward the front door and said, "Go be with those people then." Those people, meaning my husband-to-be, Luis Moreno, and his family. As if they were diseased. As if love had turned me into a different species. I remember saying, "Appa, please don't do this." He actually laughed, not because anything was funny. Because he wanted to humiliate me a little more before I left. "Don't call me that if you can't act like my daughter." Then he shut the door in my face. I stood on my parents' front porch in Naperville with my purse on one shoulder and my hands shaking so hard I dropped my car keys into one of my mother's flower pots. I had to dig them out of the dirt while their living room lights glowed through the window and nobody came back to the door. That was 8 years ago. The reason all of this came back up is because last winter, after years of pretending I was dead, my mother called me from an unknown number and asked if I could help them avoid being evicted. Not help in the emotional sense. Not, "Can we talk?" Not, "We miss you." Not even, "Your father isn't well and things are bad." It was, "Anika, we need money by Friday or the landlord will lock us out." Just like that, like we had spoken last week. Like she had not watched my father erase me from the family and then spent nearly a decade acting like it was reasonable. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I need to explain what kind of family I come from or none of this makes sense. My parents immigrated from Gujarat in the early 90s. My father was an electrical engineer, my mother worked part-time at a dental office after Dev and I got older, and they built the kind of life immigrants are always told to be grateful for. Nice suburb, good schools, temple on Sundays, big Costco runs, shoes off at the door, respectability like a religion. From the outside, we looked great. Inside the house, it was a different story. My father loved in a very conditional way. If you brought home the right grades, said the right things, wore the right clothes, kept your voice low, made the family look good, you were a good child. If you stepped outside the lines, even a little, he could turn colder than anyone I've ever known. My mother's version was softer, but not kinder. She was always talking about sacrifice and image and what people would say. She never raised her voice much, but she could make you feel selfish for wanting air. I was the older child, which in our house meant I was the practice daughter. The one who had to set the example, swallow the insult, pick the safer choice, make it easier for everyone else. Dev, who is 3 years younger, got a different version of them entirely. He was charming and funny and impulsive, and every flaw he had was translated into something lovable. If he forgot an assignment, he was creative, not academic like you. If he talked back, my father called it confidence. If I did the same thing, I was ungrateful. None of this felt unusual when I was growing up because it was all I knew. I got straight A's. I played violin for 6 miserable years because my mother liked telling other aunties I played violin. I went to the University of Illinois and got a finance degree because it was respectable and stable and my father approved. When I was 23 and got a job in corporate payroll at a medical supply company in Oak Brook, my mother told everyone at Temple, "Our daughter works with executives." I was literally processing spreadsheets and fixing employee deductions, but fine. By then the marriage comments had already started. Not direct at first, just little things. My mother showing me photos of nice boys from families she knew. My father asking if there were good Indian men at my office. Random aunties at weddings nudging me and saying, "Next one is yours," while looking me up and down like they were checking mangoes for bruises. When I was 24, one of my mother's friends invited us to dinner for what was very obviously an ambush. Their son Karen had just finished dental school and his mother kept making us sit closer together on the couch. He smelled like cologne and spoke to me as if he was interviewing me for the position of wife. At one point he actually asked, "Would you continue working after children, or are you more family-oriented?" I said, "I'm more not marrying you oriented, but only in my head." On the drive home, my father said I had embarrassed them by not being friendlier. That was the shape of things in our house. Everyone constantly preparing for a life I hadn't agreed to yet, then acting offended when I didn't smile hard enough at the idea. Then I met Luis. It happened in the least dramatic way possible. My car battery died in the parking garage under my office building in February, on one of those gross gray Illinois evenings where the air feels wet and every surface is dirty. I had stayed late because payroll was closing, and when I went to start my Honda, all I got was clicking. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes fighting the urge to cry, because I had already had a terrible day and the idea of calling my father for help felt worse than sitting in a freezing parking garage forever. A security guard was making rounds and saw me with the hood up. He said one of the electricians from the renovation crew was still downstairs and might have jumper cables. That electrician was Luis. He was 30 then, with work gloves shoved into his back pocket, a navy sweatshirt with some local union logo on the sleeve, and the kind of tired face people get when they've been up since 5. He smiled like helping me wasn't a burden. Not flirty, not weird, just easy. He said, "Dead battery?" I said, "I'm hoping the car is just being dramatic." He laughed and said, "That's usually my line." He jumped the car, made sure it started twice, and then told me to drive straight to AutoZone or I'd probably be stranded again by morning. I thanked him, and because I'm awkward when I'm stressed, I tried to hand him $20 for helping me. He looked offended in a funny way and said, "No, keep your emergency money. Buy yourself dinner." I asked for his name because it felt rude not to know it after he saved me from sitting in a parking garage sobbing into my steering wheel. He said, "Luis, you're Anika, right? Your name's on that little parking permit." There was something so normal about him that I couldn't stop thinking about him after that. Not exciting in a fireworks way. Comfortable in a way I wasn't used to. A week later I ran into him again at the coffee place across the street from my office. He remembered my battery. I remembered he took his coffee black and looked permanently unimpressed by the music they played in there. We started talking, then talking more, then timing our lunches suspiciously often. Luis was Mexican-American, born and raised in Berwyn. His dad had worked for the city, his mom was a teacher's aide at an elementary school, and his whole family did this thing that made me weirdly emotional the first few times I saw it. They actually liked being around each other. Not in a loud performative way, not in a "we're family so we have to" way. They just did. They teased each other. They argued and then got over it. If somebody was upset, no one treated it like a character flaw. If somebody needed help, help showed up. There wasn't all this scoreboard energy underneath every conversation. He was also patient in a way that almost made me suspicious at first. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He never mocked the weird family rules I had. He never pushed when I said I wasn't ready to tell my parents about him. He just said, "Okay, I'm here when you are." I didn't hide him because I was ashamed of him. I hid him because I knew exactly what my parents would do. For almost a year, I lived a double life. At home I was the dutiful daughter who came by on Sundays, brought fruit, listened to my mother complain about blood pressure and temple politics, and dodged vague marriage setup attempts. In the rest of my life I was with Luis, going to little Mexican restaurants in Pilsen where I could barely pronounce half the menu, meeting his cousins, learning which nephews belonged to which sibling, falling in love in this slow, steady way that made the whole arranged marriage conversation at home feel more surreal every month. The first person in my family who found out was my cousin Mira. She and I are 6 months apart and grew up more like sisters than cousins. I told her because I was tired of having nobody to talk to. She listened to the whole thing over pad thai in my apartment and then said, "So basically you met a kind, employed man who treats you well and this is somehow a disaster." That's exactly how it will be presented, yes. Mira shook her head. You know they're going to lose their minds. I know. You still serious about him? I didn't even have to think. Yes. She smiled a little then, sad but proud at the same time. Then at least somebody in this family should be. Things stayed quiet longer than I expected. I think maybe I was so used to hiding parts of myself by then that I got good at it. But lies like that don't age well. My mother eventually noticed I was unavailable too often on weekends. My father asked why I had started wearing lipstick, just to go to work. Dev saw a picture of Luis and me reflected in my phone screen one night when I was texting and immediately became a problem. Dev has always had a talent for turning information into leverage. He doesn't just want to know things. He wants to own them. He cornered me in my parents' kitchen while my mother was upstairs folding laundry and said, "Who's the guy?" I said, "Nobody." He grinned, "So definitely somebody." I should have lied better, but my family has a way of making me revert to 14. I said, "It's none of your business." And that was enough. 2 days later my mother called me at work in a panic and asked if it was true I was seeing someone outside the community. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. Outside the community, like I was dating a raccoon. I asked who told her and she said that didn't matter. Which, translated from parent language, meant Dev had absolutely told her. I said yes. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Your father cannot know until we talk." Which of course meant he already knew by dinner. That first confrontation was ugly but not final. My father shouted. My mother cried. I tried to explain that Luis was kind and hardworking and serious, and my father kept interrupting with things like, "I did not come to this country for my daughter to throw away her future," and, "What will people think when they hear you married some electrician?" Some electrician. That's how my father talked about him from then on. Never by name, like naming him would concede humanity. I remember saying, "You don't even know him." And my father said, "I know enough." Which was his whole philosophy in one sentence. He always believed he knew enough before learning anything. For a few months after that, my parents tried the usual control tactics. Emotional blackmail, silent treatment, sudden generosity. My mother cooked my favorite food and acted fragile. My father sent me listings for condos near good Indian neighborhoods, because apparently geography was going to cure me. Then they escalated to threats. My father said if I kept seeing Luis, he would stop helping me with anything family related. I laughed because I was 25 and he hadn't financially supported me since college. He changed tactics. He said I'd be cut off from family events. I said I wasn't exactly enjoying them at the moment anyway. He said my marriage would never be blessed. My mother said no one in the family would attend. My grandmother in Ahmedabad called me after getting a very edited version of events and said, in Gujarati, "You are trying to kill your mother." That was a fun Thursday. Through all of this, Luis never once told me to choose. He didn't say, "If you love me, leave them." He didn't trash my parents, even when they deserved it. He would sit on my couch, hand me tea, and say, "Whatever you decide it because you can live with it, not because everybody's yelling." The funny part is that my parents thought if they made him sound small enough, I would eventually see him through their eyes. What actually happened was the opposite. The uglier they got, the clearer he became. A year and a half after we met, he proposed. Nothing fancy, no flash mob, no photographer hiding in a bush. We were at Montrose Harbor, freezing, because he had the deeply Midwestern belief that a lake walk is still romantic in 38-degree weather if you wear the right jacket. He had a ring in his coat pocket for most of the afternoon and was so distracted he answered 3 different questions with, "What?" before I figured something was up. He proposed near the water with the skyline behind us, his nose pink from the cold, saying, "I know your family may never forgive this, and I hate that. But I love you, and I'm done building my life around other people's permission." I said yes before he even fully got the ring box open. I wore that ring home hidden in my coat pocket because I already knew what telling my parents would cost me. That is a terrible way to begin an engagement, by the way. Feeling joy in one hand and dread in the other. We tried one last time to do it right. Luis said he would meet my parents if they were willing. I knew it would be bad, but part of me still hoped seeing him in person might puncture the fantasy they had built. He came to my apartment one Sunday afternoon, put on the only blazer he owned, brought flowers for my mother and a box of sweets from a bakery Mira recommended, and drove with me to my parents' house. My father would not let him in. He opened the door, saw Luis beside me, and literally stepped halfway outside so his body blocked the entrance. Luis said, very calmly, "Mr. Shaw, I just wanted to introduce myself properly." My father didn't even look at him. He looked at me and said, "I told you not to bring shame to this house." Luis held out the box of sweets anyway. My father stared at it like it was a dead rat. My mother appeared behind him, saw us, and started crying before anyone had even raised their voice. Luis said, "I love your daughter. I want to marry her. I'm not here to disrespect anyone." My father finally looked at him then, and the contempt on his face was so naked I still think about it sometimes when I can't sleep. "You think because you say, love, I should forget everything?" he said. "Our values, our religion, our family? You think this is a movie?" Luis lowered the sweets. "No, sir, I think it's her life." My father said, "It is my daughter." That was the whole thing. Possession, ownership, the idea that I belonged to him until he transferred me to someone he approved of. The conversation got worse from there. My father said disgusting things, some of them subtle and some not subtle at all. About culture, about people who don't understand family, about what kind of children we would have. My mother begged me not to do this, for her sake. Dev sat on the stairs pretending not to enjoy himself. I asked my father if anything Luis could say would matter, and my father answered honestly for once. No. That was the day I emotionally left home, even though the final explosion came later. After that, everything sped up. My parents tried to set me up with a family friend's son in Dallas as if my engagement was a phase. My mother sent me photos of banquet halls and said things like, "Imagine your Sangeet here," like if she acted hard enough like my real wedding didn't exist, maybe I would fall into line. When that failed, they went nuclear. The night my father disowned me was after I told them the courthouse date was set and whether they came or not, I was getting married. That was when he said I was no longer their child. That was when my mother stayed silent. That was when Dev, from the dining room doorway, said, "You always thought you were special." I got married the following Friday in a county courthouse in DuPage. It was me and Luis and Mira and 2 of his sisters and his parents and a judge named Ellen who had perfect lipstick and looked like she'd seen every possible version of family drama already that week. I wore an ivory dress from Nordstrom that cost less than $200 because by then I had no energy left for wedding fantasy. Luis wore a charcoal suit. His mother cried through the whole thing and hugged me like she'd known me forever. His father shook my hand after the ceremony and said, "Welcome, Mija," in this gruff little voice that nearly broke me. My own parents did not come. Neither did Dev. Afterward we ate at a small restaurant in Oak Park with fairy lights and terrible parking, and for part of the night I genuinely managed to be happy. Then I got to my apartment and found 2 boxes outside the door. My mother had sent back everything I had ever left at their house. Winter clothes, old school notebooks, a photo album from high school with several family pictures removed. No note. That was how they made it official. For a while after that, I still thought time might fix it. Not quickly, but eventually. People say wild things when they're angry. I told myself that. I sent holiday texts the first year. No reply. I mailed my parents an anniversary card from our first wedding anniversary with a photo of me and Luis in front of the lake. It came back marked return to sender. When my grandfather died, nobody told me until a family friend mentioned it on Facebook. When Dev got married, I found out from Instagram. My mother wore a dark green silk sari and looked beautiful and perfectly at peace. I stopped trying after that. Luis and I built a life. Not a glamorous one, a real one. The first couple of years were tight financially because he was trying to start his own electrical contracting business and I was the one with health insurance. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Brookfield with slanted floors and radiators that clanged like haunted plumbing. We argued about bills sometimes and whose turn it was to get groceries and whether his cousin should really be storing a motorcycle in our garage space. For just a few weeks, which turned into 4 months. But it was ours, chosen, honest. When I got promoted to senior payroll analyst, he brought home supermarket flowers and a bakery cake with my name spelled wrong. When he got his contractor license, I cried harder than he did. We learned how to fight without trying to destroy each other. We bought a little brick ranch in Aurora 6 years into the marriage, nothing fancy, but it had a fenced yard and a lemon yellow front door that I hated at first and then got weirdly attached to. We also had a daughter, Sophia. That complicated everything in me. Not because Luis wasn't a good father. He was. From the second she was born, he was gone in the exact way good parents go gone. Like part of his brain permanently moved into caring about this tiny loud person. No, what complicated me was how much becoming a mother reopened the wound of having parents who could love me so conditionally. After Sophia was born, I stared at her one night at 3 in the morning while she slept on my chest and thought, if she grew up and chose someone I wouldn't have chosen, could I really throw her away? The answer came so fast it embarrassed me. No, of course not. That was the first time I really understood what my parents had done. Before that, some part of me still translated it through culture, generation, fear, expectations. Becoming a parent stripped all that decoration off. Whatever else it was cruelty. Still, I missed them sometimes. Not the exact people they had become. The idea of them, my mother showing up with food after Sophia was born. My father pretending not to be interested in the baby and then carrying her around anyway. Temple festivals, Diwali at home, the smell of cardamom and frying chilies and sandalwood. That ache never fully goes away. You just get busier around it. Then last January, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number from a local area code. I almost didn't answer because I was working and assumed it was either spam or a dentist office I'd already ignored twice. When I picked up, the voice on the other end said, "Anika?" For a second I honestly didn't recognize her. My mother's voice had gotten thinner, frailer. I said, "Who is this?" "It's Ma." That word hit me like somebody had kicked a door open in my chest. I stood up from my desk so fast my chair rolled backward into the filing cabinet. I walked into an empty conference room and shut the door. There was a long silence. I think both of us expected the other to bridge it. I finally said, "What happened?" Not hello, not how are you, just what happened. Because people do not vanish for 8 years and then call on a weekday afternoon unless something is very wrong. My mother didn't waste time. "We need help." I remember staring at the frosted glass wall of the conference room, watching shapes move outside while she explained in this rushed, embarrassed voice that they were behind on rent. There had been some financial issues. My father's health had not been good. Dev was having his own problems. Their landlord had filed already. If they couldn't pay what they owed by Friday, they would be forced out. Then she said the number. It was a little over $9,000. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it made my brain misfire. 8 years of silence and the opening bid was $9,000. I said, "You haven't spoken to me in almost a decade." My mother inhaled sharply, like I was being difficult. "This is not the time for old matters." "Old matters?" I said, "Old matters? You told everyone I wasn't your daughter." "That was your father speaking in anger. You sent my things back in boxes." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Please don't make this harder." That snapped something in me. "Harder?" I said. "You called me because you need money and you're acting like I'm making this awkward." She started crying then, real crying, and I hated how instantly my body reacted to it. I was 34 years old, happily married, standing in a glass conference room in sensible work heels, and one sound from my mother still made me feel 10. She said, "We have nowhere to go." I asked what happened to Dev. That was when things got interesting. According to my mother, Dev and his wife, Ria, had been helping my parents financially, as much as they could, but then there was a business issue and they were stretched. My father had retired earlier than expected after a mild stroke 2 years before. There had been medical bills, rent increases, and unexpected obligations. The more she talked, the more I could tell she was editing. I said, "Tell me the truth." She got defensive immediately. "This is the truth." "No, this is the version you want to tell the daughter you only remembered exists because you need something." That was harsh, and I knew it even as I said it. But I was too angry to pull it back. My mother said, with this wounded little gasp, "So you will let us be thrown out?" I said I hadn't said that. I said I needed to understand what I was being asked to fix. I asked for the landlord's contact information, the address, the filing notice, whatever paperwork they had. She hesitated so long that I knew there was more. Finally, she admitted they weren't just behind because of medical bills. 2 years earlier, after selling their house in Naperville, my parents had moved into a rented townhouse in Schaumburg to be closer to Dev and Ria. Around the same time, Dev had started some logistics brokerage business with a friend. My father used a chunk of the house proceeds to help him get it off the ground. Then there was another chunk. Then a line of credit. Then credit cards. If you're wondering whether this was the same Dev who used to call me naive for worrying too much, yes, exactly that one. Apparently the business had tanked. The friend disappeared. Dev and Ria moved to Texas for a fresh start. My parents kept covering more than they could afford because they were convinced it was temporary and because admitting the golden son had financially wrecked them would have been unbearable for their pride. When savings ran out, they started floating rent late. Then later. Then not at all. And now they were about to be evicted from a townhouse half filled with furniture from the house they had sold. My mother finished by saying, "You always were the practical one." I almost threw my phone. That was the first day. The second day was worse, because now I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be. When I told Luis that evening, he just listened. We were in the kitchen, Sophia at the table coloring on a paper placemat from some restaurant, and I was talking too fast because I was furious and shaky and still half disbelieving. Luis leaned against the counter and asked, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." "Okay, then start smaller. What do you not want to do?" That helped. "I don't want to hand over a bunch of cash and then find out it's 10 times worse than she said." "Fair. I don't want them in this house." "Also fair. I don't want this to become my life. I don't want to spend the next 5 years cleaning up after people who threw me away." He nodded. "Then don't." I said, "That sounds simple when you say it." "It's not simple," he said. "It's just still true." Then he added, very gently, "You also don't owe anyone the version of you they remember controlling." That sentence sat with me. The next morning I called the landlord's office myself. My mother had texted me the information after I pushed. The property manager, a woman named Karen who sounded exhausted but professional, confirmed they were in court the following Monday. The balance was a little higher than my mother said once fees were added. There was also damage to one of the bathroom floors from a leak they apparently never reported because they were trying to avoid inspection. Karen did say one thing useful. If the unit was fully vacated before the court date and a portion of the balance was paid under a written agreement, the owner might withdraw the filing rather than pursue a formal eviction judgment. They mainly wanted possession of the property back. That changed the problem. This wasn't actually, "Pay everything or they get put on the street." This was, "They need to be out very soon, and they don't have the money or organization to do it." I called my mother back and told her I would come by that night, but only to look at paperwork and talk. No promises. She said, "Come alone." I knew exactly what that meant. She did not want to see Luis. Even now. I said, "No. If I come, Luis comes." There was a pause long enough for me to picture her face twisting. Then she said, "Fine." That townhouse smelled like turmeric, old carpet, and panic. I had never been there before. Not once in the years they had lived in Schaumburg. Walking in felt like stepping into a fake version of family life, a set built from memory. My mother had arranged everything the way she used to in Naperville. Plastic runner on the dining table. Brass Ganesha near the entry. Sofa covered in throw pillows nobody was allowed to use. But underneath it all was neglect. Boxes stacked in corners. Papers everywhere. The air too hot because my mother had the thermostat set like a tropical greenhouse. My father sitting in an armchair by the window looking smaller than I remembered, his hair almost fully white. That shook me more than I expected. He had always seemed physically imposing to me, even when he wasn't actually that big. Seeing him shrunken into a beige cardigan with his reading glasses slipping down his nose was disorienting. My mother opened the door and cried the second she saw me, which I hated because it made the whole scene feel emotionally pre-edited in her favor. Then her eyes slid to Luis behind me, and the warmth vanished so fast it was almost impressive. She said, "You brought the child?" Luis was holding Sophia's overnight bag because we'd picked her up from my mother-in-law's on the way. He just said, "Good evening, Mrs. Shaw." Not ma, not anything intimate, just polite. My mother gave one stiff nod, like politeness from him was somehow insolent. Sophia was sleepy and hiding behind my leg. She had no idea who these people were. That part landed harder than I thought it would. My parents had never met their only granddaughter. My father looked at me, then at Sophia, and there was the slightest flicker on his face. Not enough to count as softness. Just shock. I introduced her by name because no one else was going to bridge that gap. "This is Sophia." He nodded once. "She looks like you." No one commented on the fact that they had missed 5 years of her life. We sat at the dining table. My mother brought tea like we were about to discuss weather. Luis stayed quiet, but not timid. Just present, solid. He sat beside me and kept his hand on Sophia's back while she leaned against him drawing on a receipt with a pen she found in my purse. My father tried to begin with dignity. "This is an unfortunate situation." I said, "I gathered that." His mouth tightened. My tone clearly offended him, which was honestly amazing considering circumstances. My mother slid over the papers. Court date notice, ledger, past due rent, utility shutoff warnings. I don't think she meant to include. I went through everything while Luis looked over my shoulder. The more I read, the worse it got. They weren't just one bad month behind. This had been snowballing for almost a year. There were partial payments, returned checks, late fees, a final demand, then the filing. They also had at least 2 maxed-out credit cards and a personal loan from some online lender with the kind of interest rate that should qualify as assault. I asked where the rest of the money from the house sale had gone. My father looked away. My mother said, "We helped Dev when he needed it." "How much?" No answer. I asked again. Finally my father said, "Enough." Luis, who had been patient to the point of sainthood, spoke for the first time. "With respect, sir, enough isn't a number." My father looked at him with old reflexive dislike, but he didn't have the same force behind it anymore. He said, "This is family business." Luis replied, "It became my family's business when you called my wife for money." That was the moment I knew exactly why I married him. There was a lot more arguing. Not screaming, exactly, just that awful family style where every sentence is a disguised accusation. My mother kept trying to skip to the part where I offered a solution. My father kept talking like the main problem was humiliation, not math. Every time I asked what Dev was contributing, they got vague. Eventually I learned the answer was basically nothing. He'd sent them $500 2 months before and then stopped taking my mother's calls for days at a time. Ria had apparently told my mother they needed to focus on their own little family now. I wanted to say, "Wow, sounds familiar." Instead I asked the practical questions. Could they physically move this week? Did they have anywhere to go? Did they qualify for senior housing? Would they stay with relatives temporarily? Did they actually want help or did they want me to write a check and disappear again? That last one made my father angry. "You speak to us as if we are strangers." I stared at him. "You made sure of that." Silence. Not movie silence. Real silence. Ugly and dense and too full of things nobody wanted to say next. My mother finally said, "What do you want from us?" That was such a revealing question. Not what do you need to know. Not what would make this possible. What do you want from us? Like I was extorting them emotionally. I said, "At minimum? Honesty." My father scoffed. I kept going. "And if you're asking whether I'm going to hand over thousands of dollars without a plan, no. I'm not." He said, "So that is why you came. To lecture." I laughed because I could not help it. "No, I came because despite everything, I didn't want my parents put out on the curb." "You're the one making that complicated." My mother looked at Luis then, maybe because she could tell I wasn't folding the way I used to. She said, carefully, "Would you be willing to help us find an apartment? Just until things are stable." I said, "You mean help financially or have you move in with us?" She didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. My father said, like it was obvious, "Only temporary." Luis and I both went very still. There are some things that don't even deserve a discussion because the audacity is too pure. These were the people who had refused to attend our wedding, returned my belongings in boxes, ignored the birth of our child, and never once apologized. Now they were sitting in front of the man they treated like a contamination and assuming they might move into his house. I asked, "Into our home?" My mother said, "Just until we get back on our feet." Luis said, very calmly, "That's not going to happen." My father turned on him instantly. "Nobody asked you." Luis didn't raise his voice. "It's my house too. That did it." My father actually pushed his chair back. My mother jumped in with, "Please, please, this is not the time." I looked at her and said, "You still can't even pretend to respect him for one evening, and you think I should bring you into our house?" She started crying again. I know that sounds cruel to note, but at a certain point it felt strategic, even if maybe it wasn't. My father sat back down heavily and said, "Forget it." And that was when I almost left. I was tired. I was furious. Sophia was rubbing her eyes. Luis had just been insulted in a home I didn't want to be standing in. Every old wound felt wide open again. I was halfway to grabbing my coat when something weird happened. Sophia, who had been very quiet the whole time, looked at my father and asked, "Why are you mad at my dad?" Just like that, in a 5-year-old voice. Nobody answered. She looked at me then and said, "Can we go home?" Home. Not this place. Not them. Home. I said yes. Before we left, I told my parents I would think about what I was willing to do and call them the next morning. My father said nothing. My mother followed us to the door and whispered, "Please don't punish us forever." I turned around and said, "You punished me for loving someone." She looked like I had slapped her. I barely slept that night. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of the whole thing. Let Dev fix the mess he helped create. Let my parents live with the consequences of choosing pride over relationship. Let the universe do what it does. Another part of me kept picturing my father in that armchair looking old. My mother's hands shaking over the teacups. The way they had recreated their old house inside a rental they could no longer afford. The stubborn, pathetic dignity of it. By morning I knew what I could live with. Not a blank check, not co-signing anything, not moving them into my home. But I could help them avoid the formal eviction if they accepted help on my terms. So that's what I offered. I called my mother and laid it out clearly. Luis and I would pay for a moving truck, a storage unit for 3 months, and the deposit plus first month's rent on a smaller senior apartment or condo they could actually afford. I would also pay the amount Karen at the landlord's office said was needed to withdraw the eviction filing if the townhouse was surrendered clean before court. The money would go directly to the landlord and the new place, not through them. I would not pay their credit cards, I would not fund Dev's disaster by extension, and they would not be moving in with us. My mother was silent for a long time. Then she asked, "And if we say no?" I said, "Then I'm sorry, but I'm done." That afternoon she called back and said yes. My father did not get on the phone. The next 4 days were some of the strangest of my life. I became, against all logic, my parents' crisis manager. I toured 2 senior apartment buildings with my mother because the first smelled like bleach and loneliness and she refused to consider it. The second was in a quieter complex near Hoffman Estates, 1 bedroom, older but clean, ground floor, close to a bus line and an Indian grocery. She kept saying things like, "I never thought at this age," and trailing off in a way that tried very hard to make me finish the sentence for her. I did not. I dealt with Karen from the landlord's office more than I dealt with my own parents. She was actually decent once she understood I was trying to get them out without a court order. She told me exactly what had to happen. Keys returned by Friday at noon, a walk-through, certified funds for the partial balance, and a signed agreement for the rest that would not become my obligation. Fine. I called Dev too, because if I was going to spend this much money and emotional energy, he was at least going to hear my voice. He answered on the 4th try sounding annoyed, which says everything about him. "Hey," he said, "what's up?" I almost admired it. The confidence of a man who has ruined our parents financially but still answers like he's being mildly inconvenienced by a telemarketer. I said, "Mom and Dad are about to be evicted." He sighed. "Yeah, Mom's been spiraling." "Spiraling? They have a court date, Dev." "So what, you're calling to blame me?" "Yes." Silence. Then he gave me the most Dev answer imaginable. "They're adults." Nobody forced them to help me. I still remember gripping my steering wheel so hard my hand cramped. You took their money. I borrowed money. Big difference. You took their house money. He got defensive fast, said the business failed because of market changes, because his partner screwed him, because I wouldn't get entrepreneurship, because our parents had insisted on helping. Then, with absolutely no self-awareness, he said, besides, you've always been the one they can count on in a crisis. I laughed so hard I scared myself. He said, what? I said, do not ever say that to me again. He asked how much was needed. I told him. He whistled and said things were tight right now, but maybe in a month or two. I hung up. When moving day came, Luis drove the truck. That part still gets me. He did not have to do that. He did not owe my parents a single hour of labor. But when the rental company said the only truck left was in Addison at 7 in the morning, he got up before dawn, picked it up, came home for coffee, and drove me out to Schaumburg without one complaint. My father barely looked at him when we arrived. Luis nodded and said, morning. My father said, That was it. That was all the gratitude he could manage from the man loading his furniture to keep him off the street. My mother had spent the night before packing in this chaotic, emotional way, so half the kitchen was boxed and half was still full of spice jars and tea tins and 3 different pressure cooker lids with no obvious matching base. I ended up organizing the whole thing because otherwise we'd still be there now. At one point I found an old red tin full of photos in the back of a cabinet. Most were family pictures from before I left. Birthday parties, temple picnics, Dev in a graduation gown, me in my college cap. One photo stopped me cold. It was from my 2nd grade school play. I was dressed as a star for some reason, with glitter on my cheeks, grinning so hard I looked unhinged. My father was crouched beside me in the photo, younger, smiling proudly with one hand on my shoulder. I don't know why that one got me more than the others. Maybe because it proved he had loved me once in a way that looked uncomplicated. Or maybe because it reminded me how long I spent trying to get back to that version of him. My mother saw me holding it and said, softly, you took all your things. I looked up at her. No, I said, you sent them back. She looked away. The move itself was sweaty and miserable and very Midwest January because of course it started sleeting halfway through. Luis and 2 guys from the rental company got the big furniture down the stairs. I packed clothes and kitchen stuff. My father insisted on carrying boxes that were clearly too heavy for him because pride is apparently stronger than blood pressure medication. Sophia spent the morning at my mother-in-law's because there was no universe in which I was exposing her to that circus for 8 straight hours. The weirdest moment of the day came around lunchtime. We had gotten most of the big things into the truck, and my mother offered everyone tea out of paper cups because the real mugs were packed. Luis was outside tightening straps, and I could hear him talking to one of the movers about snow tires. My father, out of nowhere, said, he works hard. I thought I had misheard him. I said, yes. That was all. No apology, no warmth, just this tiny accidental acknowledgement that the man he'd dismissed as some electrician was the only reason his things were not being left on a curb. It should not have felt like something. But it did. The senior apartment was smaller than their townhouse by a lot. 1 bedroom, a little den, older appliances, beige carpet, fake wood blinds. But it was clean, affordable, and theirs if they could manage it. I signed nothing except the check. That part mattered to me. I was helping, not becoming responsible. While my mother fussed about where the God shelf should go, I was in the leasing office handling the paperwork with the manager, a woman named Patrice. She glanced over the forms and said, emergency contact? My mother, without hesitation, said, my daughter, Anika. It was such a small thing, but it landed like a stone in water. Not because it fixed anything. It didn't, but because there it was in plain language. Daughter, written on a line where honesty mattered. I looked at her. She did not meet my eyes. That night, after the last box was in and the movers were gone and Karen had confirmed the old keys were returned and the filing would be withdrawn, my parents stood in the middle of their new living room looking dazed. I should tell you I did not feel victorious. People always imagine moments like that have some cinematic justice to them. They usually don't. Mostly everyone just looks tired. My mother thanked me first. Not a full thank you. More like, you have done a lot. My father took longer. He sat in an armchair we had wedged awkwardly through the doorway and rubbed his knee for a while. Then he said, "You handled this well." Again, that was as close as he could get to humility without physically choking. I said, "Okay." He looked annoyed by my lack of response, which almost made me laugh. My mother asked if we would stay for dinner. That was the first moment in years that felt even vaguely like old family gravity trying to reassert itself. The familiar script, crisis over, now we soften the edges and pretend the earthquake was weather. I said no. Sophia was waiting. We had work in the morning. At the door, my mother followed me out into the hall and said, "You know, whatever happened before, family is family." And there it was, the sentence I had been waiting for and dreading. The one people use when they want the benefits of relationship without the accountability. I turned around and said, "No. Family is not family no matter what. That's the whole reason we're here." She flinched. I kept going because I was too tired to lie anymore. "You don't get to throw me away when I marry the man I love, ignore my life for 8 years, call only when you need saving, and then hide behind, family is family. If you want a relationship with me now, it has to be a real one. That means Luis is my husband. Sophia is your granddaughter. And what you did was wrong." My mother started crying again, but quieter this time. Less performance, more defeat. "Maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe it was both." She said, "You don't understand what those years were like." I said, "You're right. I don't, because you never told me. You just erased me." Then I left. For a few weeks after that, things were very strange. My mother started texting occasionally. First practical things. Questions about changing utilities. Where to send the remaining balance agreement. Whether I knew a good doctor near Hoffman Estates. Then softer things. A photo of a dish she made, the way you used to like. A message asking how Sophia was doing in kindergarten. A note on Makar Sankranti that just said, "Thinking of you." My father did not text. But one Saturday afternoon, he called Luis. Not me. Luis. Luis came into the kitchen holding the phone at arm's length like it might explode and mouthed, "Your dad." I nearly dropped a bowl. He put it on speaker because neither of us trusted the situation. My father cleared his throat and said, "I wanted to ask about a contractor recommendation. There is a problem with the bathroom fan." That was all. No preamble. No admission that this was the first time he had voluntarily called my husband. Just straight into business. Luis answered him normally. Gave him the name of a guy. Asked what exactly the problem was. Explained one thing to check before calling anyone. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, I said, "Well." Luis smiled a little. "Progress. Shaw family style." I laughed harder than the joke deserved. Dev, meanwhile, remained exactly who he had always been. He called me 2 months later acting offended that I was making everyone think he abandoned them. I said he had abandoned them. He said I always loved being morally superior. I said he loved spending money that wasn't his. He told me to get over the past. I asked when he was reimbursing me for the move, the deposit, and the settlement payment. He said, "Wow, keeping score now?" I told him yes, actually. Very precisely. He has not sent a cent. The deeper mess, I learned over time, was even bigger than I realized. My parents had not just lost money on Dev's business. They had spent years funding the appearance of stability because appearances mattered more to them than reality. New clothes for weddings, gifts they couldn't afford, donations at temple to keep face, dinners out with people they did not even like. They were living inside a version of themselves they could not actually support anymore. When the money cracked, everything underneath cracked too. That part made me sadder than angry, if I'm honest. Not because it excused anything. It didn't. But because there is something bleak about people building their whole identity around what others will think, only to find out those others are not going to save them when the bills come due. About 6 months after the move, my mother asked if we would come over for dinner. This time she said, "All of you." I made her repeat it. "All of you," she said again, and I knew exactly who that wording was for. Luis looked at me when I hung up and said, "Do you want to?" I honestly didn't know. Part of me still expected every interaction with them to contain some trapdoor. But another part of me had spent years wishing for exactly this kind of ordinary invitation, and I didn't want resentment to become so central that I couldn't even recognize a door cracked open when I saw one. So we went. The apartment looked more like them by then. My mother had arranged her brass lamps, her god shelf, her lace runners, all the little things she uses to make a place feel permanent. My father had a crossword open on the table. My daughter marched in carrying a stuffed rabbit and immediately started asking why their sofa was scratchy. My mother actually laughed, not politely, a real laugh. Dinner was awkward, then less awkward, then weirdly normal. My mother had made undiyu and rotlis and rice and also enchiladas, because Sophia might like them, which was such an obvious olive branch I almost admired the effort. My father asked Luis about his business without sounding hostile. Sophia showed my parents how she can count to 20 in Spanish and then in English and then, with much less accuracy, the few Gujarati numbers I had taught her. My mother cried again over that, but softer. At one point Sophia climbed into my father's lap with absolutely no understanding of history, because children don't care about old pride wars unless you teach them to. He stiffened at first, then relaxed. I watched his hand settle on her back and felt something in me twist. Not heal, twist. Because I wanted that moment for her. And I hated that I wanted it from people who had made me bleed for so long. When we were leaving, my father walked us to the door. He stood there with one hand on the frame and said, not looking directly at me, "You were right about some things." It was not enough, but it was real. I said, "I know." He almost smiled. If you want the dramatic part, the part that made me realize nothing had changed as much as I thought, it came later that fall. My mother called me one afternoon in a panic because the rent was going up at renewal and she wanted to know if I could just cover the difference for a while. There it was again, the old instinct, reach for me when the floor shakes. This time, I said no immediately. Not cruelly, just clearly. I reminded her we had agreed from the beginning that the help avoiding eviction was one-time, practical, and structured. I said I would help them apply for a benefits program, look at cheaper prescription plans, go over their budget, even help them sell some jewelry if needed. But I was not becoming their monthly backup plan. She went quiet, then said, "I thought after everything." I cut in. After everything is exactly why. She didn't speak to me for 3 weeks after that. Which, honestly, almost made me laugh. 8 years of silence when I married for love, then 3 weeks of silence because I wouldn't subsidize their rent. Some people really do only know one punishment. Then Diwali came, and my mother sent a photo of D's lit on her apartment windowsill with a message that just said, "Come if you want." So we did. That's kind of the shape of it now. Not clean, not fixed, just ongoing. My parents did need my help to avoid eviction. They got it, but not in the way they expected. They expected the old version of me. The obedient daughter who could be emotionally starved for years and still sprint back the moment duty was invoked. The woman who would separate herself from her husband to make them comfortable. The person who would finance their denial and call it culture. What they got instead was me as I actually am. Married to the man they said would ruin my life. Standing in front of them with our daughter and a budget and boundaries. Willing to help, but not to disappear. The part that still sits sharp in my chest is this. When everything collapsed, the child they had invested in least was the one who knew how to keep the walls from falling all the way down. Not because I'm morally better than Dev. Not because I'm a saint. Mostly because I had spent my adult life learning how to build something real, and he spent his learning how to be rescued. Sometimes I think about that day on the porch when my father told me I was no longer his child. Then I think about my mother in the leasing office months ago, writing my name in the emergency contact box and calling me her daughter without even pausing. Maybe that was shame, maybe it was habit, maybe it was the truth coming out sideways because she didn't know how else to write it. Either way, I saw it. I still see it, and if I'm being completely honest, some part of me had waited years for exactly that small, ordinary contradiction. Not a dramatic apology, not begging, just reality forcing itself onto paper in her own handwriting. Daughter, emergency contact, the same hand that once sent my life back in cardboard boxes. Story 3. I found out my brother sold my car because a stranger called me on a Tuesday night and asked when I planned to mail him the title. At first I honestly thought it was some kind of scam. I get weird calls all the time because my number has apparently belonged to at least 3 irresponsible people before me. So when this guy said, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but are you Megan Walsh?" I almost hung up on him. I said, "Who's asking?" He said, "My name's Luis. I think I bought your Honda from your brother." There was this long, dumb pause where my brain just refused to process the sentence. I was standing in my kitchen in Hilliard, holding a grocery bag with frozen ravioli in it, and Nate was in the living room watching a Reds game with the volume too high. I remember I had one shoe off and one shoe on. That is how specific this memory is in my head now. I said, "What Honda?" And he said, "The silver 2013 Civic. Plate starts with JHT. There's a dent above the rear passenger wheel and a faded Hocking Hills sticker on the back window." It was my car. Or, more accurately, it was the car I had stupidly, generously, idiotically lent to my younger brother Tyler 8 months earlier because he just needed a little help getting back on his feet. Tyler is 29, I'm 34. He has been getting back on his feet since roughly age 16. To be fair, he can be charming when he wants to be. That's part of how he gets away with so much. He's the kind of person who calls everyone man and buddy, remembers your dog's name, tells funny stories at cookouts, and somehow makes every disaster in his life sound like something that just happened to him, like weather. He never does anything. Things happen to him. His truck breaks down. His boss screws him over. His girlfriend goes crazy. The bank loses paperwork. Somebody else makes a mistake. It is always like that. My mom absolutely babies him. She would deny that if you asked her, but it's true. I'm the oldest, so I was the easy one. Tyler was the one who needed more support. That phrase has followed him around for years like a perfume. He needs more support. He's going through a lot. He's under so much pressure. He didn't mean it like that. He's not as organized as you. He's always been more emotional than you. Which is funny, because the emotional one somehow never has to deal with the consequences of anything. The car in question was my old Civic. Silver, cloth seats, one cracked tail light I kept meaning to replace, around 142,000 miles when all this started. Nothing fancy, but it was reliable. I had paid it off 3 years earlier and kept it even after Nate and I started living together because we both worked weird schedules and it was nice not having to coordinate everything around one vehicle. Then my job shifted mostly remote, Nate got a company truck, and the Civic started spending a lot more time parked than driven. Tyler's Jeep Liberty died in March. Transmission, I think, or maybe that's just what he said. With Tyler there's always a story, and the details change depending on who he's talking to. One version involved a cracked housing, another involved a shop trying to scam him, another involved him, probably just needing a sensor. The point was, he suddenly needed transportation. He showed up at my mom's Sunday dinner looking especially tragic, which is a look he does on purpose. Ball cap pulled low, jaw scruffy, sighing a lot, acting like he'd been personally wronged by society. Mom had made pot roast. Rick, my stepdad, was asleep in his chair by 7:30. My Aunt Denise had dropped off a pie no one wanted. It was one of those aggressively normal family evenings that make people say yes to things they should say no to. Tyler waited until Mom was clearing plates to bring it up. He said, "Meg, can I ask you something without you immediately saying no?" Which is never a good opening. I said, "Depends." He leaned on the counter and gave me this lopsided smile like we were kids again and he was about to talk me into covering for him. "I just need wheels for a few weeks. That's it. I've got work lined up in Groveport and I can't keep paying for Ubers. I'm drowning." Mom, from the sink, immediately said, "Megan, your little car just sits there." I should say here that I hate when she does that. It's never, "Would you consider helping?" It's framed like I'm being unreasonable for still owning something I paid for. I said, "It doesn't just sit there." Nate was there too, and he glanced at me over his beer because he already knew where this was going. Tyler said, "I'll put gas in it. I'll cover insurance if you want. I literally just need it until I get my first few checks and can figure something else out." 6 weeks, max. 6 weeks, turned out to be the biggest lie in a very crowded field. I asked, "What about your Jeep?" He rolled his eyes. "It's cooked." Mom said, "He can't get to work without a car." I said, "There's the bus." Tyler laughed like I'd told a joke. "Yeah, because that's real practical from Westgate to Groveport at 5 a.m. I should have kept saying no. I know that. Nate told me later I had that look I get when I'm trying not to be the bad guy. The problem is, when you're the reliable one in a family, every boundary feels mean. It shouldn't, but it does. Tyler knows that. Mom definitely knows that. So I said yes, but very clearly. I told him he could borrow it until mid-May. Borrow, not keep, not have. Borrow. I told him it stayed in my name. He wasn't allowed to lend it to anyone else. He wasn't allowed to take it out of state without telling me. He was supposed to let me know if anything happened to it. He was supposed to pay me back for the insurance increase, because I added him as a listed driver instead of risking him driving uninsured. And because I know my brother, I texted it all to him that same night. I still have the text. Me. You can use the Civic until May 15th. It is still my car and I need it back by then unless we talk and agree otherwise. No one else drives it. Do not sell it, trade it, or do anything weird with paperwork. Tyler. Lol, yes mom. Then. I mean yes ma'am. Then. I'm borrowing it, not stealing it. I wish I were making that up. The first month was mostly fine. He picked it up, hugged me, promised he'd take care of it, even vacuumed it out before he drove off like he was trying to show me he appreciated it. He texted a week later saying it was running like a champ. He brought it back one Sunday so Nate could help him change the oil. He acted grateful. He called me the best sister ever in front of our mom, which she ate up. Then it shifted. It started with little things. He stopped answering right away when I asked if he'd paid the insurance money. He said he'd get me next week. Then I got a parking ticket in the mail from downtown Columbus, which annoyed me because he hadn't mentioned it. He swore he'd pay it. He did, eventually, but late, so I got another notice first. Then May came around and I asked when he was dropping the car off. He said, "Can I do one more month? Just one. I'm so close to getting ahead." At the time, I still wasn't commuting much, so I said okay. I told him June 15th, absolute latest. He sent a bunch of praying hands emojis and said, "Love you." June turned into July because my office delayed the return to office schedule. July turned into August because Tyler said he was in the middle of moving out of mom's place and into an apartment in Reynoldsburg with a guy from work. Then in August he said he needed the car to pick up his daughter, Paisley, for his weekends. That part got me. Paisley is 6. She is sweet and shy and obsessed with sparkly sandals. Tyler and his ex, Brianna, have been on and off hostile since Paisley was born. If there is a way for two people to turn a simple pickup into a hostage negotiation, they will find it. So when Tyler said, "I can't show up to get my kid in an Uber, Meg," I caved again. That was my pattern all year. I kept thinking I was helping him get through one more temporary rough patch, and every time I extended it, he took that as proof I had no real line. By the fall he had fully stopped speaking about the Civic like it was mine. It was always the Honda or my car if he wasn't paying attention. The first time I noticed it, we were at Mom's for Labor Day and he tossed his keys on the table and said, "I think my brakes are starting to go." I said, "Then let me know because it's still insured under me." He actually looked annoyed that I'd corrected him. "Yeah, okay, your car." Jesus. Mom immediately jumped in with, "He didn't mean anything by it." Which, maybe not consciously. But words matter. People tell on themselves. Then there was Thanksgiving. That was the day I should have gone and taken the keys right out of his hand. Mom hosts every year even though she complains every year that no one helps enough. Tyler showed up an hour late with store-bought rolls he forgot in the car until dinner was already on the table. Rick had football on. Denise was complaining about her wa. Nate was helping Mom with the turkey because Rick thinks basting is women's work, which is an entire separate issue. At some point Tyler was standing in the kitchen talking to Denise's husband, and I heard him say, "Yeah, I'm probably gonna sell that Civic after Christmas and get something bigger. This thing's too low." He said it so casually that for a second I actually thought he must be talking about someone else's car. I turned around and said, "You're not selling anything." Everybody got quiet. Tyler had this look on his face like I'd embarrassed him in public. I was joking. "No, you weren't." Mom said, "Can we not do this at Thanksgiving?" Tyler laughed in that fake disbelief way he does when he's caught. I said, "Probably. It's called making conversation, Megan." I said, "Stop calling my car yours." He shrugged and reached for a roll. "You haven't driven it in like 8 months. That sentence sat in the room like a bad smell. I said, and I've put money into it." I almost laughed. "Gas doesn't make it yours." He looked at Mom like he was appealing to a referee. "I did brakes, too." I said, "You didn't ask me before doing that." "Well, should I have just let your car be unsafe while I was driving it to work?" Nate finally stepped in and said, "Tyler, knock it off." Tyler gave him this cold look and said, "This is between me and my sister." Mom started clattering dishes louder than necessary, which is her way of trying to drown conflict without actually addressing it. Denise muttered, "Lord." Rick kept staring at the TV like maybe if he didn't make eye contact he wouldn't be dragged in. I told Tyler, very calmly, I need the Civic back by the end of the year. He said, "That's not happening." Just like that, flat, casual, like he was declining an invitation. I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I'm telling you right now, with my work schedule and Paisley and everything else, I can't just be without a car because you suddenly decided to care." That last part really got under my skin. Suddenly decided to care, as if I'd abandoned it at sea and he'd rescued it. I said, "It's mine. That's why I care." Mom pulled me aside while Tyler went outside to cool off, which in Tyler language means smoke and call 3 people to tell them how badly he's being treated. She said, "Megan, I know he's hard sometimes, but don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I said, "He literally just told me my own car isn't coming back." She lowered her voice. "He is stressed. He's trying. Can't you give him until after the holidays?" That was always the trick. Frame every boundary as terrible timing. There is never a good time to expect Tyler to act like an adult. I said, "No, I'm serious now. January 1st. Mom looked hurt, like I was being unreasonable with a child. January came, and Tyler stopped replying consistently. Not completely. He wasn't dumb enough to go fully silent right away. He'd send enough messages to keep the situation blurry. "Hey, sorry, crazy day. I'm at work, call later. Battery died this morning. Paisley's sick, can't deal with this today." Then my company announced that our temporary hybrid pilot was becoming permanent and I needed to be in the office 3 days a week starting February. Nate's company truck access also changed, which meant we couldn't keep juggling with one reliable vehicle the way we had been. So I texted Tyler on January 24th and said I needed the Civic back no later than February 2nd. No wiggle room. No, if possible, no apology. I even said Nate would come with me if that made pickup easier. He left me on read for 6 hours, then replied, "It's at Travis's place getting looked at." I said, "For what?" He said, "Starter maybe." It was clicking. I said, "Give me the address." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm taking it back." Then he went quiet until the next morning and sent, "Don't be dramatic. I'm not stopping you from taking it. It just doesn't run right now." I asked again for the address. He didn't answer. That weekend Nate drove me to Tyler's apartment in Reynoldsburg. I didn't tell him we were coming because if I had, he wouldn't have been there. His place was one of those tired beige complexes where every balcony has at least one broken folding chair on it. His roommate's truck was in the lot. Tyler's girlfriend at the time, a woman named Kelsey who changed hair colors with her mood, opened the door in socks and said Tyler wasn't there. I said, "Where's the Honda?" She blinked. He said it was at his friend's. I said, "Which friend?" She shrugged. "I don't know." Nate, who had been mostly quiet, said, "Can you ask him to call her back right now?" Kelsey immediately got defensive, which told me Tyler had already spun some story. "I'm not getting in the middle of family stuff." I said, "You already are." Tyler called me 20 minutes later, furious. He said, "Why are you showing up at my apartment?" I said, "Because you're dodging me." He said, "I'm not dodging you. I told you the car's getting worked on." I said, "Where?" He said, "Jesus Christ, Megan, why are you acting psycho?" That's another one of Tyler's favorite moves. The second you insist on something, you're overreacting. I said, "Because I think you're lying." He hung up on me. That Tuesday, 4 days later, Luis called. Once he told me the plate and the dent in the sticker, I sat down at the kitchen table so fast the chair scraped. Nate muted the TV and looked over. I said into the phone, "Start from the beginning." Luis sounded nervous, like he thought I might be angry at him personally, which I wasn't. He said he'd bought the Civic from a guy named Tyler the previous Friday night in the parking lot of a Speedway on Broad Street. Tyler had listed it on Facebook Marketplace for $4,800, then dropped the price because he said he needed it gone that weekend. Luis said Tyler told him the title had been misplaced during a move, but a duplicate was already in process. He showed Luis a handwritten bill of sale, a copy of registration, and told him the car was his, just under his sister's address because he hadn't updated stuff after a family thing. That was such a stupid lie I almost admired it. Luis said he drove the car home, found my insurance card and old registration in the glove box, and got weird about the names not matching what Tyler had said. When he went to the BMV on Tuesday, the clerk told him there was no title transfer pending and the registered owner was still Megan Walsh. So I googled your name from the insurance card, he said. I know that sounds creepy. It's fine, I said. I'm really sorry, I didn't know. I have screenshots of the listing and our messages if you need them. My hand was shaking so hard I had to put the phone on speaker. Nate said, ask him to send everything. So I did. Within 2 minutes, screenshots started coming through. There was my car, parked in front of Tyler's apartment building, photographed from angles that conveniently hid the worst scuff on the bumper. Clean Honda Civic, runs great, daily driver, cash only. There was Tyler's profile picture grinning in a Bengals hoodie. There was a message thread where Luis asked, title in hand? And Tyler replied, can get it no issue. Family car. There was a photo of the bill of sale. Tyler had signed my name. Not even well, either. It looked like a child trying to copy cursive off a cereal box. I felt this weird coldness move through me. Not even just anger. Something flatter and meaner. Because up until that moment, some part of me had still been telling myself this was a misunderstanding, or a bluff, or Tyler being careless with language. Seeing my forged signature snapped all of that in half. Nate said, call him. I did. Tyler answered on the third ring sounding annoyed. What? I said, did you sell my car? Silence. Then, who told you that? I said, a man named Luis who bought my Honda from you on Friday. Another pause, then a sigh, like I was making his evening difficult. He said, okay, first of all, relax. That was his first of all. I said, relax? He said, I was going to talk to you. When? Soon. You forged my name. It was a bill of sale, Megan, not a bank robbery. I don't think I've ever seen Nate go as still as he did in that moment. I said, tell me right now that you did not sell my car. Tyler switched tactics instantly, from dismissive to defensive. You weren't using it. I've put money into that car for almost a year. I needed cash. I was going to pay you from the sale. I said, it wasn't yours to sell. He said, louder now, I've been driving it every day. I did brakes, tires, oil changes. I didn't tell you to. You let me have it. No, I didn't. You basically did. That word, basically. Tyler lives in the space between what actually happened and what he can almost convince people happened. I said, how much did you get for it? He hesitated. $4,000. Luis had told me $4,300. I said, where is the money? More silence. Then he said, most of it's gone. Of course it was. I think I laughed then, but not because anything was funny. It was that awful laugh people do when they're too angry to process speech. I said, you sold my car, forged my signature, spent the money, and you think I'm supposed to relax? He snapped, stop acting like I stole some Mercedes. It's an old Honda. Nate took the phone from me before I said something I couldn't take back. He said, listen carefully. You have one chance to make this right tonight. Tyler said, put Megan back on. I'm not talking to you. Nate said, no, you're going to send every message with the buyer, tell him the sale was fraudulent, and have the money ready. If you don't, we're filing a police report. Tyler actually laughed. Police report? For a family car? Good luck with that. Then he hung up. I called my mom because despite everything, there is apparently a part of me that still thinks maybe if she hears the truth, she'll step up and be a parent. She answered on the second ring all cheerful, and I said, did Tyler tell you he sold my car? The silence on her end told me she already knew something. She said carefully, he mentioned he was trying to work something out. I said, work something out? He sold it, he forged my name. Her first response was not outrage. It was, well, why would he do something like that unless he felt cornered? I swear to God. I said, because he's Tyler. She sighed. Megan, lower your voice. I'm not yelling. You are very upset. Yes, because my brother committed a crime. Mom hated that word immediately. Don't say it like that. How should I say it? He took my property, pretended it was his, signed my name, and sold it for cash. She said, he planned to give you the money. With what? He spent it. He said he used some of it for bills. I remember leaning against the counter and closing my eyes because I could feel myself getting to the point where if I stayed on the phone much longer I was going to say something unforgivable. I said, do you hear yourself? She got sharper then. Do you hear yourself? He is your brother. And I was his sister when he sold my car. She said, he made a bad decision. I said, no, Mom. He made about 15 decisions in a row. Posting it, meeting the buyer, lying, signing my name, taking the money. None of that was an accident. Then she said the thing I had half expected and still hated hearing. Can't you just take the money and be done with it? I said, there is no money. There was this little pause, and then she said, quieter, he said there was some left. That told me Tyler had already been working damage control on his side of the family. Of course he had. I asked how much. She said, I think maybe 1,200. From over 4,000. I hung up on her. The next morning I took a half day off and went to the police station in Hilliard with a folder. Not metaphorically, an actual folder, printed screenshots, title copy, registration, insurance, our text messages, everything Luis had sent me. Nate came with me because he knows when I get furious I get too clipped and people think I'm being difficult. The desk officer at first had that expression cops sometimes get when they think they're about to referee a domestic mess that should really be handled in small claims court. Which, fair enough, because my brother sold my car, probably does sound like one of those situations where both sides think they're the victim. He asked, did you give him permission to use the vehicle? I said, yes, borrow it, not sell it. He asked, for how long? I handed him the printed text. Originally 6 weeks. Extended several times, never transferred ownership. I have the title at home. He read through the messages, then looked at the photo of the forged bill of sale, then at the marketplace listing. His whole posture changed a little. He said, do you still have the original title? Yes. In your name? Yes. Do you know where the vehicle is now? I gave him Luis's number and address because Luis had texted that morning saying he was willing to cooperate if this was really theft. He sounded miserable. He wasn't some scammer. He was a guy who thought he found a decent deal on a used commuter car and ended up in the middle of family insanity. The officer left for a few minutes and came back with a detective from auto theft. Detective Hensley was probably in his 40s, compact, tired eyes, the exact vibe of a man who had heard every stupid story before lunch. He sat down across from me and said, walk me through this from the beginning. So I did. The whole thing. March dinner, agreement to borrow, the repeated extensions, Thanksgiving, February deadline, Tyler dodging, Luis's call. Hensley stopped me a few times to ask specifics. Did Tyler ever have possession of the title? No. Did I sign anything? No. Was he ever listed on the registration? No. Did I ever tell him he could sell it on my behalf? Absolutely not. Then he held up the fake bill of sale and said, this signature isn't yours? Not even close. He looked at Nate. You familiar with her signature? Nate said, I live with her. That's not her signature. Hensley gave a short nod and said, okay. This isn't a civil misunderstanding. I know that sounds small, but hearing an actual detective say that was such a relief I almost cried right there. Because when your family spends years minimizing everything, you start second-guessing even the obvious. They took my statement. They called Luis. They had me email all screenshots. Hensley said they'd likely need to recover the vehicle as evidence and that Tyler could be facing several charges depending on how the prosecutor wanted to file it. I asked, what about Luis? Hensley rubbed his forehead. He may be out his money unless he pursues your brother directly. He's a victim too, from what I can tell. That part genuinely sucked. I felt awful for him. Before we left, Hensley said, don't contact your brother again today. If he contacts you, save everything. Tyler contacted me 23 minutes later. You can always tell when he's been told something serious is happening because he gets suddenly overfamiliar. He texted, are you seriously doing this? Then, Meg, come on. Then, call me before this gets stupid. Then, you know I was gonna make it right. Then, my personal favorite, don't let Nate gas you up. I did not answer. He started calling. I didn't pick up. Then Mom called. I let that ring out too. Then my Aunt Denise called, which told me the family group chat had lit up. I answered Denise because, unlike my mother, Denise at least occasionally lives in the same reality as the rest of us. She said, tell me exactly what happened, because your mother is saying this is some kind of misunderstanding over a loaned car. I said, he sold it and forged my signature. Denise said, after a beat, oh, well, that's not great. I almost laughed. No. She lowered her voice. Your mother is beside herself. About me or about Tyler? There was a little silence there. Mostly Tyler. That tracked. By that evening Tyler had switched from guilty to enraged. He left me 2 voicemails. In one he said I was ruining his life over an old car. In the other he said, you know damn well you basically gave it to me. That word again. Basically. Luis met with the detective the next day and surrendered the car. He sent me a message afterward saying, I'm sorry this happened. I feel sick. I told him I was sorry too. He'd already paid to insure it for the week and had taken a day off work to deal with the BMV issue. Tyler had dumped this mess on everyone around him like he always did. The Civic ended up at an impound lot for a while because they needed to process it and photograph everything. I couldn't just go pick it up immediately, which annoyed me, but I understood. What I didn't understand was how Tyler kept acting shocked that anyone was taking this seriously. 2 nights later Mom showed up at my house unannounced. She does this thing where she knocks once and then opens the storm door before you even answer, as if family homes are public buildings. Nate was in the shower, I was still in work clothes, and she came in with that stiff posture that means she's not here to listen. She sat at my kitchen table and put her purse down very carefully like she was attending a hearing. She said, I am asking you, as your mother, to stop this. I said, you're about 3 days too late. She looked genuinely offended. Don't speak to me like that. Then don't come over here and ask me to protect Tyler from Tyler. She drew in a slow breath. He made a desperate mistake. I said, Mom, he forged my name. She said, do you know how ugly this could get for him? I just stared at her. She kept going. He could lose his job. He could have trouble with custody. He could end up with charges on his record over something that should have stayed in the family. That was the moment, more than anything Tyler did, that made something in me go cold. Because she wasn't asking what I needed. She wasn't asking whether I was okay. She wasn't horrified on my behalf. She was managing fallout for him. I said, it stopped being an in-the-family issue when he sold my car to a stranger in a Speedway parking lot. She pressed her lips together. You know how he is. Yes, I said, that's the problem. Then she said something I will probably remember forever. She said, you've always been stronger than him. It was meant as praise. Or maybe justification. Like because I had managed to be stable and pay my bills and not commit fraud, I was now obligated to absorb more damage. I was the stronger one, so therefore I could take it. Again. I said, that doesn't make me his emergency fund. She started crying, which is another thing my family does when they're losing an argument. Not fake crying exactly, but emotionally weaponized crying. Real tears, wrong purpose. She said, I raised you both better than this. I said, did you? That ended the visit. She left angry, which was honestly a relief because at least anger is direct. The next week was mostly phone calls, paperwork, and tension humming under everything. Tyler texted me paragraphs, deleted some, sent new ones. Sometimes apologizing, sometimes blaming me, sometimes both in the same message. One said, I was under pressure and not thinking straight. Another said, if you hadn't threatened to take it right then I wouldn't have had to move fast. That one almost made me throw my phone. He also kept insisting he had a right to recoup what he put into the car. I asked the detective later if people actually say things like that with a straight face. He said, every day. Apparently Tyler had told multiple family members that he had basically bought the Civic from me informally and I was now trying to back out because Nate wanted a second car again. None of that was true, obviously, but Tyler has never let facts interfere with a useful narrative. My cousin Amber called me and said, he told Grandma you sold it to him for $2,000. I said, with what $2,000? Amber said, that was my question too. Even Rick, who avoids conflict like it's contagious, called me once just to say, I don't agree with how your mother's handling this. Which is about as bold as he gets. Meanwhile, the detective kept me updated in short, clipped calls. They had Tyler's marketplace listing, Luis's payment records, the forged bill of sale, my title, our messages. Tyler had apparently admitted in an interview that he sold the vehicle but tried to frame it as a family ownership dispute. That argument got weaker once they asked why he signed my name. According to Hensley, Tyler's answer to that was, I didn't think it mattered because she knew it was my car by then. By then, like ownership transfers through vibes. The actual police knock happened on a Saturday morning about 2 weeks after Luis's call. I wasn't there for it, but I know exactly how it went because I got 3 separate versions from 3 separate people, and all the details lined up enough. Tyler had been staying at Mom's because he and Kelsey had apparently blown up over the whole mess. No surprise there. Mom later claimed he was just there for the night, but his duffel bag was in the guest room and his Xbox was plugged into the den, so I'm comfortable saying he had moved himself back into her house in classic Tyler fashion. At 6:47 in the morning, 2 uniformed officers and Detective Hensley knocked on Mom's front door. Mom thought something terrible had happened to me. That is one detail I almost find darkly funny. The brief, shining moment where she heard police at the door and her brain did not automatically assume Tyler. Imagine. She opened the door in her robe. Hensley asked if Tyler Walsh was there. She said yes. They said they had a warrant. Tyler, apparently, had heard voices and came down the hallway in a t-shirt and plaid pajama pants, asking what was going on. Mom told me later he genuinely thought he could talk his way out of it. That is the most Tyler thing in the world. He said, "This is about the car? Are you serious?" Hensley said something like, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Mom started crying and asking if that was necessary. Tyler said, "Mom, call Megan. This is insane." Rick came downstairs halfway through and apparently just stood there in silence while Tyler got handcuffed in the foyer under the little "Bless this home" sign my mother keeps by the coat closet. If I were writing fiction, I would cut that detail for being too on the nose, but life doesn't care about subtlety. Mom called me at 6:58. I was awake because I had insomnia all that week, and when I saw her name that early I knew immediately. I answered and she was full panic breathing. "They arrested him," she said. I sat up in bed. Nate woke up beside me and immediately looked at my face. I said, "Okay." That was all I said. Mom sounded almost offended by my tone. "Megan, they came here. They handcuffed him." I said, "Yes. That's usually how arrests work." She burst into tears again and said, "How can you be so cold?" I looked at the wall for a second because there was no answer she would hear. Then I said, "He sold my car." She said, "It was a mistake." I said, "No, Mom. It was a crime." Then she hung up on me. Nate asked, "Was that it?" I nodded. He said, very softly, "You okay?" And I said something honest for once. "I don't know." Because I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I also wasn't sorry. Mostly I felt tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that comes from finally letting a thing become real after years of being told not to make trouble. Later that day Denise called and gave me the play-by-play in the voice people use when pretending not to enjoy gossip. Tyler had mouthed off at the officers, asked if they were seriously wasting county resources on this, and then shut up very quickly when Hensley mentioned forgery. Mom had tried to say it was a family misunderstanding. Hensley apparently told her, "Ma'am, your daughter is the victim in this case." I wish I could frame that sentence. Tyler spent the weekend in county. Mom and Rick scrambled to get him a lawyer. Brianna found out through a cousin before Tyler could spin it and, from what Amber told me, was not exactly thrilled about the father of her child getting arrested for selling his sister's car. The family split in predictable ways. Denise and Amber were on my side. Rick was neutral but quiet supportive. Grandma said, "Well, he shouldn't have done that then," which from Grandma is basically a Supreme Court ruling. Mom, obviously, acted like I had detonated a bomb in the middle of her life. A couple extended relatives sent me messages about forgiveness and keeping things private, which is always easy advice from people whose property wasn't stolen. A week after the arrest, I was finally allowed to retrieve the Civic. Nate drove me to the impound lot because I didn't trust the car after however Tyler had been driving it, and also because I weirdly didn't want to arrive alone. The lot smelled like wet asphalt and old oil. A bored guy behind thick glass made me sign 3 forms and pay a fee that I am still angry I had to pay. When they brought the Civic around, I almost laughed again, that same bitter little laugh from before. Tyler had put cheap black seat covers in it. There was a pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror, a cracked phone mount stuck to the dash, and an empty pack of fruit snacks under the passenger seat. My glove compartment was full of his gas station receipts and one of Paisley's coloring pages. The Hocking Hills sticker was still there, half peeled at one corner. The dent over the back wheel looked worse. It was so familiar and so not mine at the same time. Nate checked under the hood while I stood there with my arms crossed against the cold. He said, "Battery's newer." I said, "Great." He upgraded the stolen goods. On the drive home I kept thinking about how many times Tyler must have sat in that car and convinced himself the story was true. That I had basically given it to him. That using it long enough made it his. That putting money into maintenance erased the fact that it never belonged to him. That because I had tolerated smaller things before, I would tolerate this too. That's really the part people don't understand unless they've had a family member like this. The big thing never starts as the big thing. It starts with 20 smaller invasions. Borrowing and not returning. Forgetting to pay you back. Telling your story wrong in front of other people. Acting put upon when corrected. Making you seem petty for caring. By the time something outrageous happens, they're counting on your exhaustion. Tyler called me once from jail before he bonded out. I didn't know it was him because the number was blocked and the automated voice said I had a collect call. Against my better judgment, I accepted. There was a pause, then Tyler said, "Wow. So this is really where we are." Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Just that. I said, "You're the one who sold my car." He exhaled hard into the phone. "I can't believe you actually let them do this." Let them? You could have stopped it. I said, "No. You could have not committed a felony." He got quiet for a second and then said, "You always do this." I almost laughed because it was so absurd. Do what? Act like you're better than everybody. That's another old trick. When accountability fails, accuse the other person of superiority. Make their refusal to be mistreated into arrogance. I said, "I act like my belongings are mine." He said, "It was a car, Megan." I said, "Exactly. A car. Not a sweatshirt. Not a lawn chair. A car." Then he said something that honestly summed him up better than anything else has. He said, "I thought because we were family, you wouldn't make it a thing." There it was. The whole rotten center of it. Not remorse. Not confusion. Just surprise that I had finally decided he didn't get unlimited access to me because we share parents. I hung up on him. After he got out, Mom tried one last time to broker some kind of peace meeting at her house. She called it, sitting down as a family and finding a way forward. I asked if Tyler planned to show up with the rest of the money he stole, reimburse my impound fees, cover the insurance mess, and apologize without blaming me or Nate or stress or the moon. She said, "Well, probably not in those exact terms." So I said no. Tyler sent one last text after that. "You've made your point." I never answered, because that was the problem. To him, everything is a contest of points and pride and who embarrassed who. There was never any point to make. I just wanted my car back. The last actual image I have of this entire mess is Tyler standing in Mom's foyer in plaid pajama pants with handcuffs on, blinking like the world had malfunctioned. He genuinely did not think it would go that far. He thought I would yell, Mom would cry, some relatives would call, maybe I'd take whatever scraps of money he still had left, and that would be the end of it. That had always been the ending before. Noise, guilt, cleanup, reset. Instead, a stranger called me from my own car, a detective looked at the forged signature and said it wasn't a misunderstanding, and 2 officers showed up at my mother's front door before 7 in the morning. Tyler always counted on family, meaning he could do whatever he wanted. He just didn't expect family to come with a police report. Story 4. I found out my future mother-in-law was trying to cancel my wedding because the florist called me crying. That's not an exaggeration. I was at work, sitting in a supply closet because our office had decided open concept meant no one deserved walls, when my phone buzzed with a local number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but wedding vendors had been calling from all kinds of numbers for weeks, so I answered. The woman on the other end said, "Hi, is this Emma?" I said yes. Then she hesitated and said, very carefully, "This is Claire from Blue Aster Floral." I just wanted to confirm before I processed the cancellation request. I remember staring at the mop bucket in front of me like I'd misheard her. I said, "The what?" She paused again. "The cancellation request for your June 14th wedding at Willow Creek Barn." I'm so sorry if I've gotten something mixed up. My heart dropped so fast it actually made me feel sick. I said, "No one is canceling my wedding." And then there was this awful silence where we both realized exactly what kind of conversation we were having. Claire lowered her voice like she was talking to someone in a hospital hallway. The woman who called said she was the groom's mother and that there had been a family emergency. She knew your date, your fiancé's name, and the flower package. She asked about refund timing. I stood up so fast I hit my head on a shelf. The groom's mother. There is only one person that could have been. My future mother-in-law, Denise. Even then, even with my stomach turning inside out, some part of me still tried to be fair. Denise could be overbearing and weirdly territorial about my fiancé, Ryan, but surely even she wouldn't actually try to cancel our wedding behind our backs. Maybe she'd misunderstood something. Maybe she'd called to ask a question and the florist got confused. So I said, did she give a name? Claire said, she said Denise Mercer. That was that. I thanked her, told her absolutely nothing was cancelled, and asked her please not to make any changes unless she heard directly from me from my personal number or from Ryan standing next to me. She sounded relieved, honestly. Like she'd had a bad feeling the whole time and was hoping I'd say exactly that. Then I walked out of the supply closet, went straight to the stairwell, and called Ryan. He answered all cheerful because he had no idea he was about to ruin both our afternoons. Hey babe, he said. Everything okay? I said, did your mother call our florist and try to cancel the wedding? Silence. Then, what? I repeated it. Another silence, longer this time. Then he said, no. No way. Ryan is 32, I'm 29, and one of the things I've always liked about him is that he doesn't do that fake certainty some people do when they're scared. He wasn't defending her. He sounded genuinely stunned. I said, the florist says Denise called, used your name, our date, the venue, and said there was a family emergency. She tried to cancel and asked about the refund. He blew out a breath so hard I could hear it through the phone. I'm calling her right now. I said, no, wait, because once the initial panic wore off, something else kicked in. Denise might be sneaky, but she was also the kind of sneaky person who assumed everyone else was dumber than she was. If she'd tried it with one vendor, there was a chance she'd tried it with others too. I said, call no one yet. I'm calling every vendor first. He got quiet. Then he said, Emma, if she actually did this. I said, I know. And I did know. If Denise had really tried to shut down our wedding behind our backs, it wasn't one fight. It wasn't one misunderstanding. It was a whole different category of problem. For context, Denise had never liked me, but she also never disliked me openly enough for Ryan to fully grasp how bad it was. That sounds manipulative because it was. She was one of those women who could insult you in a tone so sweet it made you sound crazy for noticing. She'd squeeze my hand and say things like, you're so confident wearing your hair that short. I never could. Or, you're lucky Ryan isn't picky. Some men care about whether a woman can really host. Or my personal favorite, after finding out I kept my last name professionally because all my licensing was under Emma Salazar, well, I guess traditions matter less to some people. Always with that airy little smile. Always just deniable enough. Ryan's family lived in Carmel, Indiana. Mine was in Fort Wayne. We met in Indianapolis 6 years earlier when I was working as a physical therapy assistant and he was doing project management for a commercial construction company. He was steady, funny in a dry way, and the first man I dated who didn't seem threatened by the fact that I had opinions and used them. His dad, Tom, was fine. Quiet, checked out, the kind of man who'd been married to a strong personality for so long that he functioned mostly as background furniture unless sports were involved. His younger sister, Kelsey, was decent enough, though she'd been trained by the family ecosystem to smooth things over at all costs. Denise was the sun around which everyone else orbited. At first I thought she was just intense. Then I realized she was controlling. Then I realized she specifically hated not being central. When Ryan and I got engaged, that got worse. He proposed on a chilly October weekend at Eagle Creek Park. Nothing flashy, just us walking near the water, him acting weirdly quiet for 20 minutes, then stopping near this wooden overlook and pulling the ring box out with shaky hands. I cried immediately. He cried too, which he denies. It was perfect. We called our families from the car. My mom screamed. My dad got emotional in that gruff dad way where he suddenly becomes very interested in clearing his throat. My younger brother Mateo demanded to know if there would be good food. Denise's first words were, already? Ryan laughed because he thought she was joking. She wasn't. After that, everything became about correction. She didn't like the season we picked. June was too humid. She didn't like the venue. A renovated barn on a lavender farm outside Noblesville was rustic in a trendy way. She didn't like that we wanted around 90 guests instead of the giant 200-plus wedding she clearly pictured. She didn't like that I wasn't doing a church ceremony. She didn't like that my cousin Tessa, who is covered in tattoos and owns a salon, was my maid of honor because Denise thought it looked a little Vegas. She didn't like that Ryan and I were paying for most of it ourselves. That last one mattered more than I understood at the time, because when she offered to help, it wasn't really help. It was leverage. At our first wedding planning dinner, Denise slid an envelope across the table like she was making a business acquisition. Inside was a check for $5,000. I remember my stomach tightening then too. My parents had contributed what they could, but they did it plainly. Here's what we can manage, use it however helps. No speeches, no strings. Denise made a whole production of it. She said, a wedding is about family, and we want to make sure Ryan has the day he deserves. Not we want you both to have a beautiful day. Ryan. I looked at Ryan, and he looked at me, and later in the car I said I was uncomfortable taking it. He asked why. I said, because your mom is going to treat it like she bought partial ownership of the wedding. He actually laughed. She'll definitely have opinions either way. He wasn't wrong, and I didn't want to start a huge fight over money that would make things easier, so we accepted it. That was mistake number one. The opinions ramped up immediately. She started referring to things as our florist, and our guest list, and the colors we chose, even though she hadn't chosen anything and half the time actively complained about what we chose. She pushed to invite family friends Ryan hadn't seen in 15 years. She tried to talk us into a live band that cost more than our entire catering deposit. She kept suggesting we move the ceremony earlier, for older guests, which just happened to coincide with the schedule that would let her preferred pastor officiate. We said no, politely, over and over. Every no became, in Denise's mind, evidence that I was controlling Ryan. That was her favorite narrative. Not that Ryan was a grown man with preferences, but that I was influencing him away from the family. If we skipped Sunday dinner because we both worked late, Denise would text him, I miss the old Ryan. If he sided with me on something, she'd say, you've changed. If I suggested a plan before she got a chance to, she'd go quiet in that theatrical way she had, like she'd just witnessed a public disrespect. Ryan saw some of it. He did, but when you grow up with a parent like that, it's amazing what starts to feel normal. He'd say, she means well. Or, she's just traditional. Or, she gets intense around big life events. And I'd say, your mother acts like I'm stealing you. He'd rub the back of his neck and say, she'll calm down after the wedding. A lot of women will read that sentence and already know where this is going. Anyway, once I got off the phone with the florist, I sat in my car and made a list of every vendor we'd booked. Venue, caterer, photographer, DJ, baker, rental company, hair and makeup, transportation. Then I started calling. The venue manager, a woman named Jasmine who had the patient voice of someone who spent her life solving other people's chaos, answered on the second ring. I asked whether anyone had contacted Willow Creek Barn about our June wedding. She said, actually yes. That's when my hands started shaking. Jasmine said someone claiming to be family had called the day before asking about procedure if the bride and groom need to postpone. She hadn't canceled anything because the caller didn't know the contract details and sounded evasive. Jasmine had asked for the passphrase on file. We did not have a passphrase on file. At least not until that call. Jasmine said, afterward I made a note because it felt off. I was actually going to email you this evening. I could have kissed that woman. I called the caterer. Same thing. Denise had called asking whether final headcount could be reduced substantially because of a change in plans. The baker had gotten an email from an address that looked almost like mine but with an extra letter in it. It asked whether the cake design could be changed to something simpler and more modest. The DJ hadn't heard from her, thank God, but by then I was so angry I could barely see straight. Then I called our photographer, Melanie, who had been in the wedding industry long enough that nothing surprised her anymore. When I explained what was happening, she went, oh, wow. Bride's side or groom's side? I said, groom's mother. She sighed in this deeply seasoned way. Yeah, that tracks. Apparently this was not even the first sabotage-adjacent in-law situation she dealt with that year. By the time I finished the calls, it was obvious Denise hadn't successfully cancelled anything, but she'd absolutely been trying to either cancel, shrink, alter, or postpone our wedding without us knowing. And here's the part that really got me. She'd started with the vendors she thought she could influence quietly. The ones involving aesthetics, logistics, and money. Not because she panicked, because she had a plan. I drove home in a tunnel vision kind of rage. Ryan was already there when I got back, pacing in the kitchen. He had his phone in his hand and that tight look around his mouth he gets when he's furious but trying to stay rational. He said, "Did she call multiple people?" I just nodded and put my bag down. Then I told him all of it. Jasmine, the caterer, the baker email, the florist. He sat down at the table and just stared at the wood grain for a few seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm done." That was the first time I think he fully understood this wasn't me not getting along with his mom. This was active sabotage. He called Denise on speaker. I didn't even have to ask. I think he wanted me to hear it. She answered with that breezy, warm voice she used when she knew she needed plausible innocence. "Hi, sweetheart," Ryan said. "Did you call our wedding vendors?" Long pause. Then a laugh. "What?" He repeated it. Denise said, "I don't know why you're speaking to me like this." He said, "Because Emma got a call from the florist about a cancellation request under your name." Another pause, and then she pivoted instantly into offense. "I was trying to help." Ryan actually blinked. "Help how?" "Well, someone has to be practical. You two are making expensive decisions without thinking long-term." I said, "So you tried to cancel our wedding?" She sucked in air like she was scandalized I'd spoken. "Emma, don't be dramatic." That phrase. Women like Denise really think they invented reality every morning. Ryan said, "Mom, answer the question." She said, "I did not cancel your wedding. I asked some questions because I'm concerned." "There's a difference." I said, "You told the florist there was a family emergency." She went quiet for half a beat too long. "I may have said something to get information because no one tells me anything." Ryan said, "Because it's not your wedding." Tom's voice floated faintly in the background then, asking something about dinner, and Denise snapped at him to be quiet. That told me she'd taken this call somewhere private in the house, which made it feel even more ridiculous. She switched tactics again and got weepy. "I just wanted to protect you. This whole thing has gotten out of control. The money, the venue, the ridiculous little farm. It's a lavender venue," I said before I could stop myself. Ryan shot me one of those "don't make me laugh right now" looks and then said, "Mom, you lied to our vendors. You tried to change our plans behind our backs." She said, "I am your mother. I have watched you make one impulsive decision after another since she came into your life." That hung there for a second. I'll give Ryan credit. He didn't waffle. He didn't soften it. He didn't say let's all calm down. He said, "You owe Emma an apology, and you're not contacting a single vendor again." Denise immediately said, "Oh, so this is all about Emma." He said, "Yes, and me, because it's our wedding." She started crying then, full-on crying voice, saying she was just trying to save us from a mistake. Ryan said if she contacted anyone else, she'd be uninvited. She went dead silent. Then she said, cold as ice, "If you punish your family over a misunderstanding, don't expect it to be forgotten." And she hung up. I stood there in the kitchen with my arms wrapped around myself because all the adrenaline had turned into this weird hollow feeling. Ryan looked wrecked, not conflicted, just wrecked, like some final protective layer in his brain had finally been peeled away. He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." And I did. He hadn't done it. He'd backed me up, but there's still grief when you realize the family you were trying to join has been rooting against you. That should have been the end of it. Lock down the vendors, uninvite Denise if needed, keep moving. But that's not really how people like Denise work. The next 48 hours were chaos. Kelsey texted Ryan saying Mom was devastated and never meant to hurt anyone. Tom called and said Denise had only been asking questions because she was worried we were over budget. Ryan's Aunt Linda, who lived in Ohio and somehow always appeared whenever there was gossip, messaged me on Facebook saying, "I hope you know weddings are stressful for mothers too." Meanwhile, Denise herself sent a 6-paragraph text that managed to include the phrases, taken out of context, maternal concern, and hostile environment, but somehow not, "I'm sorry." Then my cousin Tessa called and said, "Okay, I need you to breathe before I tell you this." That is never a sentence followed by anything good. I said, what now? She said, one of my clients is friends with your fiance's cousin. Apparently Denise's version is that you were thinking of canceling because of money and she was trying to gently help. I just started laughing. Tessa waited it out. Then I said, of course it is. Because that's the thing about people like Denise. They don't just do the bad thing. They immediately start building the alternate history where they are the injured party. Ryan and I sat down that night and went through every single wedding account. All of them. The venue portal, the shared planning spreadsheet, our wedding email, vendor logins, payment records. We changed every password, added two-factor authentication, and created a simple code word system with all vendors. If anyone called to make changes, they'd need the code word and they'd need to verify from either my phone number or Ryan's. Jasmine at the venue suggested it. I wanted to send her a fruit basket. That should have made me feel better, but instead it made me realize how vulnerable we'd been. Weddings involve so many moving parts, so many people, and so much assumption that family means safe. A week went by in a tense stand. Ryan didn't talk to Denise. Tom sent occasional guilt-soaked messages that always somehow centered Denise's feelings. Kelsey tried to play mediator. I threw myself into work because if I stopped moving, I started imagining new ways his family could ruin things. Then came the rehearsal dinner issue. Originally, Ryan's parents had offered to host it. They'd booked a private room at an Italian place in Carmel and kept insisting they had it handled. After the vendor stunt, I told Ryan I no longer trusted them with anything involving our wedding timeline, guest communication, or money. He agreed immediately, which honestly hurt a little because it meant he trusted them that little too now. So he called Tom and said we'd be making different rehearsal dinner plans. Tom sounded blindsided, but your mother already put money down. Ryan said, then she can get it back. Tom got quiet, then said, you don't understand what this is doing to her. Ryan said, actually I think I do. That night Denise emailed both of us, because apparently text was too intimate for martyrdom now, and said she was heartbroken to be cut out of meaningful family traditions, after all she had done. At the bottom of the email she added, please let us know if you will be returning our contribution to the wedding. There it was. The leverage. I looked at Ryan and said, we need to give the money back. He said, I know. We had enough saved to cover the gap, but it hurt. Not ruinous hurt, but real hurt. The kind that changes honeymoon plans and means we'd probably be eating takeout at home instead of going anywhere fancy after the wedding. Still, the second we both said it out loud, I felt lighter. So Ryan mailed them a cashier's check with a brief note, we are returning your contribution. Please do not contact our vendors or make any further wedding arrangements on our behalf. Clean, polite, final. Denise lost her mind. She called him 17 times in one afternoon. 17. When he didn't answer, she left a voicemail crying that he was humiliating the family. Then another saying I had poisoned him. Then another saying if we were returning the money, we should also stop pretending we wanted inclusion in the first place. She also told several relatives that I had forced Ryan to reject his family's generosity. It would almost be funny if it weren't so exhausting. At this point, my backup plan started as a joke. We were in bed one night, both too tired to sleep, and I said, honestly, at this rate I half expect your mother to show up in white and set the barn on fire. Ryan made this grim little noise that meant unfortunately possible. Then I said, maybe we should have a secret second wedding. He turned his head and looked at me. What? I laughed. I'm kidding, kind of, but then I kept thinking. Not a second wedding exactly. More like a protected version of the wedding. Something no one could tamper with. Because here was my biggest fear, and I didn't tell many people this at the time because it sounded paranoid. I no longer believed Denise would stop. Even with passwords, even with the money returned, even with consequences, she had too much emotional investment in regaining control. If she couldn't cancel the wedding on paper, maybe she'd create enough chaos around it that it fell apart anyway. A scene at the venue. A fake emergency. Some stunt with guests. Something. I had grown up in a loud, close Puerto Rican family where if someone was upset, they just got upset. They yelled, they cried, they argued in the kitchen, then somebody handed you a rose con gandules and life moved on. Denise's family did something different. Everything was hidden, strategic, polite on the surface. which made it harder for outsiders to recognize how deep the sabotage ran. So my joke became a real conversation. I said, "What if we legally get married before the actual wedding day?" Ryan frowned. "Like courthouse married?" "Yeah, quietly. Just us and maybe 2 witnesses. Then if your family pulls some kind of stunt at the ceremony, they're not actually stopping anything. The wedding day becomes the celebration, not the only moment." He looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he said, "That's actually not a bad idea. It wasn't about tricking anyone or stealing the romance. It was about removing Denise's power to ruin the core thing. So we did it. We told exactly 4 people, my parents, Tessa, and Ryan's friend Marcus, who ended up being one of our witnesses. The other witness was my friend Lena from work, who cried harder than I did and then took us for tacos afterward. 3 weeks before the wedding, on a rainy Thursday morning, Ryan and I got legally married at the Marion County Clerk's office. I wore a simple ivory wrap dress and low heels. Ryan wore a navy button-down and the nice watch I'd given him for his birthday the year before. My hair frizzed because it was drizzling in June in Indiana is apparently a swamp with paperwork. The waiting area smelled faintly like floor cleaner and coffee. There was a couple ahead of us arguing about parking validation, and an older man at the desk kept calling everyone, "hun." It was completely unglamorous and weirdly perfect. When it was our turn, the woman who handled our paperwork looked at us over purple reading glasses and said, "You too nervous?" Ryan said, "Not until recently." She snorted like she'd heard that before. We said our quick little legal vows in a small room with beige walls and a fake plant in the corner. Marcus held his phone at a terrible angle. Lena cried. Ryan squeezed my hands so hard I could feel his pulse in his fingers. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful. Whatever happened on June 14th, we would leave that day married. That was the backup plan. But then, because life likes extra drama, Denise gave us another reason we'd made the right choice. A week before the wedding, Jasmine from the venue called again. This time she sounded less alarmed and more annoyed, which somehow scared me more. She said, "I just want to make you aware that a woman came to the property today asking to walk through the reception layout." I closed my eyes. Denise? Yes. Apparently Denise had shown up in person claiming she was helping finalize a few family details. Jasmine, bless her forever, told her that only the contracted couple could request changes. Denise then tried to argue that she was hosting several important guests and needed to discuss seating adjustments. Jasmine told her no. Denise asked to see the bridal suite. Again, no. Then she asked where the ceremony rain backup would be because she had concerns about older guests walking on grass. Jasmine said, "Ma'am, I can't discuss event details with you." Denise apparently left in a huff and told Jasmine she was being very difficult. I asked if she'd touched anything. Jasmine said no, but then added, "You may want to consider private security." That sentence changed everything. We'd never planned on security. 90 guests, barn venue, mostly family and close friends. It hadn't seemed necessary. Now it seemed insane not to. So Ryan and I hired 2 off-duty sheriff's deputies through a local event service. Not for some huge visible production, but just for controlled access and backup if anyone decided to get theatrical. 1 at the entrance and 1 near the ceremony, reception transition areas. When Ryan told Marcus, Marcus said, "This is the most Midwestern mob wedding I've ever heard of." Which did make me laugh for the first time in days. We also changed another detail no one knew about except our inner circle: guest check-in. Originally we were just going to have a welcome table with seating cards. After Denise's venue visit, Tessa suggested stationing 2 of our more assertive cousins there with the guest list and explicit instructions that if anyone tried to drop off materials, make changes, or speak to the coordinator on behalf of the family, they were to smile, say no, and alert Jasmine or security. My cousin Diego was thrilled by this responsibility in a way that probably says too much about him. He said, "So I'm basically wedding bouncer adjacent." I said, "Please don't say that on the day." He said, "Copy that." Meanwhile Denise was still technically invited, because Ryan wasn't ready to cut that cord completely. I didn't love it, but I understood it. He wanted to believe that boundaries plus consequences plus public setting would keep her in line. I said, "If she does one thing, I'm done." He said, "If she does one thing, I'm handling it." And to his credit, I believed him by then. The morning of the wedding was bright and hot in that sticky Indiana way where the air feels pre-chewed. Willow Creek Barn looked gorgeous. The lavender fields were in bloom, the white chairs were set out facing the little wooden arbor, and the reception space smelled like eucalyptus and lemon polish. I got ready in the bridal suite with Tessa, Lena, my mom, and my Aunt Maribel, who had somehow brought 3 emergency sewing kits, a Tide pen, and enough hairspray to alter the ozone layer. For a little while, it actually felt normal. Tessa was doing touch-ups at the vanity. My mom kept tearing up every time she looked at me and then pretending she had dust in her eye. Maribel was muttering in Spanish about the heat and pinning things nobody asked her to pin. Lena was fielding texts from people downstairs like an air traffic controller. I had on my dress, this fitted crepe gown with a square neckline and low back, simple but elegant, exactly what Denise had called plain in an expensive way, when she saw a photo. My veil was clipped in, my bouquet was perfect, and for the first time I thought maybe we were actually going to get through the day. Then Lena got that face. The face where someone is trying not to alarm the bride. I said, "What?" She said, "Nothing major." I just stared at her until she handed me her phone. It was a text from Diego. "Your future mill brought 2 extra women and one is carrying a garment bag like she's about to change the script. Security aware," Ryan informed. I looked up slowly. Tessa said, "What now?" I handed her the phone. She read it and went, "Oh, absolutely not." We found out later the 2 women were Denise's church friend Carla and Carla's sister, both of whom I had met exactly once. Denise had apparently decided they would be helping with last-minute family hosting. Why one of them had a garment bag remains one of my favorite mysteries. Tessa insists it was either a backup dress for Denise or some weird decorative item she planned to force into the venue. Ryan intercepted them before they got far. I didn't see it happen, but Marcus gave me the full recap later, and enough people corroborated it that I trust the version. Denise arrived wearing pale champagne, which was close enough to white to make her point without giving anyone a clean confrontation. She saw the deputies at the entrance and immediately got offended. She asked why there was security at a family wedding. Diego, who I will love forever, apparently said, "Standard event protocol." Carla tried to carry the garment bag inside. One of the deputies asked her to hold up. Ryan came over. Denise smiled that hard smile of hers and said, "There you are. We brought a few things to improve the reception flow." Ryan said, "No, you didn't." Tom, who had arrived separately, looked like a man witnessing a train appear in his kitchen. Denise said, "Don't be rude in front of guests." Ryan said, "You are not bringing in unknown items, extra people, or making changes. If you're here to attend, attend. If not, leave." Carla and her sister apparently froze like they'd suddenly realized they'd been recruited into somebody else's lunacy. Denise then made her big mistake. She said, loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "I am your mother, and I will not be treated like some unstable stranger because your wife is paranoid." Not fiancé. Wife. That part still makes me smile. Because only Ryan and I, plus a tiny handful of people, knew that technically she had just called me exactly what I already was. Ryan stepped closer and said, "Then stop acting like it." Marcus told me the silence after that was incredible. Denise started crying, of course. Real tears, mascara-threatening tears. She said all she had wanted was a decent wedding for her son. Tom tried to calm her down. Carla looked ready to evaporate. One of the deputies very discreetly moved closer. And then, because this woman was physically incapable of not escalating, Denise pointed at the reception hall and said, "This entire thing is tacky and rushed and none of it should be happening like this." Ryan said, "Leave." She actually laughed through the tears. "You can't mean that." He said, "You tried to cancel our wedding. You showed up at the venue to interfere. You are done. Leave now." I wish I could say she exited with dignity, but no. She started insisting he was making a scene, which is such a specific flavor of manipulator logic. As if the person objecting to the sabotage is the one causing disruption. Tom kept saying, "Denise, let's just go sit down," but she wouldn't. Finally one of the deputies stepped in and said, in a professional but unmistakable tone, "Ma'am, you need to decide whether you are staying as a guest under their conditions or leaving the property." She looked around and realized, maybe for the first time in her adult life, that no one was actually going to bend. Tom told her he was staying. That part shocked everyone. Even Ryan, I think. Tom just said, very quietly, "You need to go home." Denise stared at him like he'd slapped her. Then she spun around, told Carla and the sister to come with her, and left. Just like that. Not dragged out, not physically removed, just furious, humiliated, and suddenly aware that the audience was not on her side. When Lena told me all this in the bridal suite, I sat down on the little velvet stool and started laughing. Not graceful laughing, not relieved chuckling, full shaky, disbelieving laughter with tears coming out of my eyes and Tessa handing me tissues while saying, "Careful with the makeup, babe." My mom, who had been incredibly patient through the entire engagement, just crossed herself and said, "Good enough." And because Ryan had already texted me one sentence, handled, "You okay?" I knew the answer was yes. More okay than I'd been in months, actually. Because the worst case scenario had finally happened in daylight, with witnesses, and it had failed. By the time the ceremony started, the energy had changed completely. Not perfect, there was still this buzz of what just happened moving through certain pockets of guests. Tom looked drained. Kelsey had red eyes from crying in the bathroom after her mother left. A couple relatives kept doing that awkward overly cheerful thing people do when pretending there hasn't been family drama 30 feet away. But the actual ceremony was beautiful. The sun had dipped just enough to soften. The lavender smelled sweet in the heat. Ryan's face when he saw me was the exact same face he made at the courthouse, just dressed in a better suit. And standing there, walking toward a man I was already legally married to and deeply choosing all over again, I felt this wild private steadiness. No one could take this from us. Not retroactively, not spiritually, not legally, not emotionally. The ceremony itself was short and real and ours. We wrote our own vows. Ryan's made me cry at the second sentence because he mentioned the first cheap apartment we shared and how I used to dance while making boxed mac and cheese. Mine made him laugh because I promised to always tell him when his mother was being manipulative even if he didn't want to hear it. The guests laughed too, which felt right. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, there was this tiny extra thrill under my skin because technically it was the second time, and somehow that made it even sweeter. The reception turned out to be exactly the party we wanted. Good food, too much tequila, my cousin Mateo hijacking the DJ playlist for 20 minutes. Marcus giving a speech that started as a roast and ended weirdly sincere. Tessa dancing barefoot by 9:30. My dad crying during our dance and pretending he had something in his eye just like my mom. Tom came up to me about an hour in, holding a whiskey he looked like he needed. He said, "Emma." I turned, not sure what to expect. He looked tired in a way that made him seem older than usual. "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. He went on, "I should have stepped in sooner. Ryan shouldn't have had to manage that alone, and neither should you." It wasn't a perfect apology. It was still filtered through his own shame, but it was honest enough that I nodded. I said, "Thank you." Then he said, "For what it's worth, this is a beautiful wedding." I almost told him it was technically our second wedding, but I resisted. Kelsey apologized too, later, in a quieter and sadder way. She said she'd spent years minimizing their mom because it was easier than confronting her, and she was sorry she'd done that to me. I hugged her. She cried again. It was that kind of night. Denise, for her part, sent Ryan a text at 10:43 p.m. that simply said, "I hope you're happy with what you've done." He showed it to me while we were eating cake in the corner like little reception goblins avoiding our own guests for a minute. I read it and handed the phone back. Then I said, "I am, actually." And I meant it more than I can explain. Not because she'd been humiliated. Not because she'd left. Not because we'd won. But because for once, her chaos had hit a wall. She didn't get to decide whether the wedding happened. She didn't get to revise the guest list, slash the budget, alter the flowers, or stage manage the day into something she approved of. She didn't get to hold money over our heads. She didn't even get to weaponize the ceremony itself, because by the time she tried her final performance at the entrance, the thing she wanted to stop had already happened weeks earlier in a beige county office with a fake plant in the corner. That's the part she never saw coming. She thought the wedding was the target. But the wedding was only ever the party. The marriage was already ours. Story 5. Am I the a-hole for expecting my girlfriend to do my half of her chores as well? I've been going back and forth on this for weeks because part of me feels completely justified, and another part of me keeps wondering if I crossed a line somewhere and just don't want to admit it. I'm 24, and my girlfriend, Maya, is 23. We've been together a little over 2 years and have been living together for about 8 months now in a small 2-bedroom apartment just outside the city. It's nothing fancy, but it's comfortable, and for the most part, things between us have been good. When we first moved in together, we had one of those adult conversations about responsibilities. Bills, groceries, cleaning, all that stuff. We split rent 50-50. Utilities too. For chores, we didn't make some strict schedule, but we agreed to divide things in a way that felt fair. Maya hates doing dishes, like genuinely hates it. Meanwhile, I don't really mind them, but I hate doing laundry. So naturally, we agreed I'd handle dishes, and she'd handle laundry. I'd also take out the trash and do most of the cooking, since I enjoy it more. She'd clean the bathroom, vacuum, and generally keep things tidy. It worked pretty well at first. The first couple months were actually kind of nice. We'd joke about playing house, cook together sometimes, binge shows at night. It felt like we were building something. But around month 4 or 5, things started shifting. Maya works as a dental assistant, and her schedule can be a bit all over the place. Some days she's home by 4, other days it's closer to 7. I work remotely in IT support, so I'm home all day. Because of that, I naturally started doing more around the apartment just by default. If I saw dishes in the sink, I'd just do them. If the trash was full, I'd take it out. It didn't feel like a big deal at first. But then I started noticing that Maya wasn't really keeping up with her side anymore. Laundry would pile up for days. Sometimes over a week, I'd run out of clean socks or underwear and end up doing a load myself just because I needed something to wear. The bathroom would get pretty gross before she finally cleaned it. I'm talking toothpaste stains in the sink, hair everywhere, the mirror smeared. At first, I didn't say anything. I figured she was just tired or stressed from work. Everyone has off weeks. But it became a pattern. One night, I remember coming out of my office around 6:30. I'd just finished a long day dealing with angry clients, and I walked into the kitchen expecting to start dinner. The sink was full, not just a couple plates, like piled up. Cups, bowls, utensils, even a pan. Stuff that clearly wasn't just from that day. Maya was in the living room scrolling on her phone. I said, kind of casually, "Hey, did you mean to leave all this for me?" She looked up and said, "Oh, yeah, I was going to get to it later." I didn't want to start anything, so I just sighed and started washing dishes. But as I was doing them, I realized something that kind of annoyed me. A lot of the stuff in the sink wasn't even from meals I made. She'd been eating lunch at home and just leaving everything there. So I walked back into the living room and said, "Hey, can you at least rinse your stuff or put it in the dishwasher next time?" She shrugged and said, "You're the one who said you'd handle dishes." That rubbed me the wrong way. I said, "Yeah, but I didn't mean I'd clean up after you every single time you use something." She rolled her eyes a bit and said, "It's just dishes. You're already doing them." I let it go, but that was kind of the moment things started feeling uneven. After that, I started paying more attention. I noticed that when I cooked, I'd clean as I went. When she cooked, she'd leave everything. Counters messy, stove splattered, and all the dishes for me. Laundry got worse too. There was one week where I literally had to dig through a pile to find a clean shirt for a Zoom meeting. I ended up doing 2 loads myself. When I brought it up, she said, "You could have just asked me." And I said, "I shouldn't have to ask. It's your thing." She got defensive and said I was being controlling. That word stuck with me. I don't think I'm controlling. I don't tell her what to wear, who to hang out with, nothing like that. But somehow asking her to stick to what we agreed on turned into me being the bad guy. Anyway, here's where things escalated. About 3 weeks ago, Maya got really busy at work. They were short-staffed, and she was picking up extra shifts. She'd come home exhausted, which I understood. So I stepped up more. I handled pretty much everything that week. Cooking, dishes, trash, even vacuuming once because it was getting bad. I didn't complain. I figured relationships aren't always 50-50. Sometimes one person carries more, and that's okay. But then her schedule went back to normal, and nothing changed. She kept acting like I was just supposed to handle everything. One night, I sat her down and said, "Hey, I feel like I've been doing a lot more around here lately, and it's starting to get to me." She looked annoyed right away and said, "I've been working a lot." I said, I know, and I helped out because of that. But now things are back to normal, and you're still not doing your part. She crossed her arms and said, so what, you want me to do everything now? I said, no, I want things to be fair again. She didn't say much after that, just kind of brushed it off. So I decided to try something different. Instead of doing everything automatically, I started waiting. If the laundry piled up, I left it. If the bathroom got messy, I didn't touch it. I still did my usual stuff, dishes, trash, cooking, but I stopped picking up her slack. Within a few days, the apartment started looking rough. Clothes everywhere, bathroom gross, dust building up, and it clearly bothered her. One evening, she came out of the bathroom and said, why is it so dirty in here? I looked at her and said, I don't know. Why is it? She stared at me and said, are you serious right now? I said, yeah, that's your responsibility. She got upset and said, you've been home all day. You couldn't just clean it? And that's when I said something that kind of set everything off. I said, why would I do your chores too? She looked at me like I just insulted her. I kept going, probably more bluntly than I should have. I already do more than I agreed to. I'm not going to start doing your half as well. She raised her voice and said, wow. So you're just going to let the place turn into a mess to prove a point? I said, no, I'm just not going to clean up after you anymore. She stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. We didn't talk much that night. The next day, she cleaned the bathroom and did some laundry, but she was clearly pissed. Cold, distant, barely speaking to me. A couple days later, things kind of blew up again. I had cooked dinner, pasta and garlic bread. After we ate, I started clearing the table like usual, and she just sat there scrolling on her phone. I said, can you help me out for a minute? She didn't even look up and said, with what? I said, just clearing up. She sighed dramatically and said, you're already doing it. And I just snapped a bit. I said, yeah, I'm always doing it. That's the problem. She put her phone down and said, oh my God, you're still on this? I said, because nothing's changed. Then she said something that honestly caught me off guard. She said, you're home all day. It makes sense that you do more. I said, working from home doesn't mean I'm not working. She said, it's still easier than my job. That pissed me off. I said, so because you think your job is harder, I'm supposed to be your maid? She said, I didn't say that. I said, that's basically what you're implying. We went back and forth for a while, and eventually I said, I'm not doing your chores anymore. Not now, not later. If your stuff doesn't get done, that's on you. She said, fine, then don't expect me to do anything for you either. And I said, I already don't. That didn't go over well. Since then, things have been tense. We're not yelling anymore, but it's cold. We do our own things, barely talk outside of basic stuff. In the apartment, it's like this weird split. My areas are clean, the kitchen is mostly fine because I still use it, but her side of the bedroom is a mess. The laundry situation is still inconsistent. The bathroom goes back and forth between clean and not depending on when she decides to deal with it. The thing is, I don't feel like I'm asking for something unreasonable. I'm not expecting perfection. I'm not timing her or making charts or anything. I just want her to handle what we agreed on without me having to remind her constantly. But at the same time, I can't ignore the fact that she seems genuinely hurt and frustrated. A couple days ago, she said, you've changed since we moved in together. And I didn't even know how to respond to that. Because from my perspective, I feel like I've been picking up more and more responsibility while she's been doing less. But maybe I have changed. Maybe I've become more rigid about this than I should be. I don't know. Part of me thinks, why should I have to do my half and hers too? That doesn't feel fair at all. But another part of me wonders if I'm being too strict about splitting things evenly instead of just helping out more because we're a team. I just don't want to end up in a situation where I'm doing everything and resenting her for it. So yeah, I've been stuck in my head about this. I need to know if I'm out of line for expecting her to do her share and refusing to take on her chores as well, or if I'm missing something here.